You want me to hand him over? Caleb's voice didn't shake. He's bleeding on my floor. I'm not handing anybody over. The man across from him smiled like that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Three others stood behind him, all of them bigger. All of them certain this would take 30 seconds. They had no idea who they were talking to. If you're new here, welcome, subscribe to the channel, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The day Caleb Whitmore decided to stop being invisible started the same way every other day had started for the past 6 years, with the smell of motor oil, the sound of a radio playing something country and sad, and the quiet weight of being the only parent his daughter had left. He was under the chassis of a '98 Ford F-250 when he heard the motorcycle. He'd heard hundreds of motorcycles. Red Hollow sat along a stretch of Route 17 that connected 3 larger towns. So bikers passed through all the time, solo riders. Small groups. The occasional pack that rattled the windows of the diner across the street and made the older residents grip their coffee cups a little tighter. Caleb had stopped noticing motorcycles the same way he'd stopped noticing the heat. It was just part of the landscape, but this one was different. It came in too fast. Fishtailed slightly on the gravel outside his bay doors. And then cut out with a hard, grinding stop that told him 2 things immediately. The rider was either showing off or something was wrong. And from the way the engine died, ragged, labored, almost relieved he knew it wasn't the first one. Caleb slid out from under the truck. The man who climbed off the bike moved like someone carrying a secret in his ribcage. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with a Hell's Angels vest that had more road dust on it than any vest Caleb had seen in a long time. He's late 40s, maybe 50, dark hair shot through with gray at the temples. A face that had made hard decisions and lived with them. And a left side that he was holding together with one arm pressed tight against his ribs, like he was afraid something might fall out if he let go. He didn't make a sound. That was the thing Caleb noticed first. A man that hurt should have been making sounds. You're bleeding, Caleb said. The man glanced down at himself like he was checking the weather. Little bit, he said. More than a little bit. I've had worse. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked out at Route 17. Empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like it was about to be interrupted. You going to stand there and bleed on my gravel, Caleb said, or you want to come inside? The man studied him. It wasn't a quick look. It was the kind of look that measured things, calculated, weighed odds. People who'd lived in certain worlds developed that look. It wasn't distrust exactly. It was more like a reflex. The constant need to know whether the person in front of you was going to cost you something. You know who I am? The man asked. Don't know your name, Caleb said. Don't care much about the vest. Come inside before you fall over. His name was Dylan Carter. And he told Caleb that much while Caleb cleaned the wound, a long gash along his left side. Deep enough to need stitches, but not deep enough to kill him. The kind of cut that came from a blade that had been close but not close enough. Caleb had a first aid kit that was better stocked than most, because when you ran a one-man garage, you learned real fast that emergency rooms were 40 minutes away and waiting wasn't always an option. This needs real stitches, Caleb said. Hospital's on the far side of Tucson. I know that too. Caleb pressed a cloth against the wound and held it. Who did this? Dylan's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. He looked around the garage the way a man looks around a room when he's trying to decide how much truth he can afford to leave in it. His eyes moved over the tools on the pegboard, the calendar from 3 years ago that Caleb kept meaning to take down. The crayon drawing of a horse that his daughter Sophie had made and taped to the corner of the workbench because she said the garage needed color. His eyes stopped on the drawing. You got a kid, Dylan said. 7 years old. She's at school. Just me. Dylan was quiet for a moment. Then, you shouldn't have brought me inside. Probably not, Caleb said. He kept his hands steady on the wound. You want me to put you back out there? Dylan looked at him. Something moved across his face, not quite surprise, not quite gratitude. He's something older than both of those things. Men are following me, Dylan said. Cars, maybe 4. I lost them about 12 miles back, but I didn't lose them for long. Caleb felt the information land in his chest and settle there. He didn't move. He kept the pressure on the wound. What do they want, he asked. Me dead, Dylan said. Or close enough to it that I can't talk. Talk about what? Things that would put certain people in federal prison. Dylan's voice was flat. Clinical. Like he was reciting facts that belonged to someone else. I've got documentation. Digital. I've got enough to end careers and end freedom for people who thought they were untouchable. They know I have it. They know I haven't sent it yet because there's one piece I'm still missing. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Why haven't you sent what you already have? Because what I already have gets me halfway there. Halfway there means they can still wiggle out. I need all of it or none of it is worth the risk. And the risk right now is those 3 cars. Yeah. Caleb took a breath. He looked at the wound, at the cloth that was already darkening through, at the man sitting on his work stool with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the garage door. How long do I have? Caleb asked. Dylan blinked, like the question wasn't what he expected. Before they show up? Yeah, 20 minutes, maybe less. Caleb stood up. He went to the garage door, the big rolling one that faced Route 17, and pulled it down. Not all the way. Enough to break the line of sight from the road without shutting out all the light. Then he went to the side door, checked the lock, and came back. I'm going to need more gauze, he said. And then we're going to figure out what to do about the next 20 minutes. Dylan stared at him. You're not going to ask me to leave. You can barely walk. That's not what I mean. Dylan's voice was careful now. Deliberate. Most people, when they find out men with knives, are 20 minutes behind me. Most people find a reason to remember somewhere else they need to be. Caleb looked at him. I've got a garage to run. I'm not going anywhere. He called his neighbor Patrice first. She was 62, retired, and had watched Sophie in emergencies before without asking too many questions. He kept it simple. Sophie's pickup at school. Dinner if it ran long. He'd explain later, and Patrice said fine the way she always said fine. With the particular tone of a woman who understood that explanations were sometimes things you owed people after the fact, not before. Then Caleb went to work. He moved Dylan to the back of the garage, behind the metal shelving unit, where he kept spare parts and bulk oil, not because it was a good hiding place, but because it was out of direct sight lines from the doors. He found a second cloth, better gauze, and a roll of medical tape that had gotten mixed in with the shop tape at some point, and he dressed the wound as well as he knew how. Dylan sat with his back against the shelving and watched Caleb work with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. You do this before, Dylan asked. Patch people up? No. But I've put enough machines back together. Biology's not that different. Something's torn. You clean it. You close it. You give it time. Machines don't feel it. No, Caleb said. They don't. He secured the last strip of tape. That's going to hold for a few hours if you don't move around too much. After that, you need a real doctor. After tonight, Dylan said quietly, I'll get a real doctor. They sat in the relative quiet of the back of the garage. Outside Route 17 stayed still. No sound but the wind and the occasional distant car passing through without slowing. Tell me about the documentation, Caleb said. Dylan's eyes moved to him. Why? Because if I'm going to make decisions in the next 20 minutes, I should know what I'm making them about. Dylan was silent long enough that Caleb thought he wasn't going to answer. Then Dylan said, you know Marcus Greel? Caleb knew the name. Everyone in Red Hollow knew the name. Marcus Greel was the man who owned half the commercial real estate on the east side of town, who had his name on the new wing of the community center, who appeared at every town event with a smile that looked like it had been installed professionally. He was the kind of man who never seemed to do anything wrong because everything wrong he did, he had other people do for him. I know him, Caleb said. He runs a protection operation out of 3 counties, Dylan said. Businesses pay or they burn. Not literally, he's smart enough to know that literal fires attract investigators. But figuratively, health code violations that appear overnight. Noise complaints that shut down restaurants. Loans that get called in at impossible times. It's sophisticated, and it's been running for 11 years, and nobody's touched him because he owns enough of the right people. And you have proof of this. I have a transaction trail, Dylan said. Transfers, correspondence, testimony from two men who took his money and are willing to talk. What I don't have yet is the recording. There's a specific conversation that happened 8 weeks ago in a specific building where Greel explicitly directed his people to escalate against a family who refused to pay. That family's hardware store burned down 3 days later. The recording exists. I know it exists because the man who made it told me before he disappeared. Disappeared, Caleb said. 6 weeks ago. Dylan's voice didn't change. His name was Tommy Reese. He was 26 years old, and he was brave, and he was scared, and he did the right thing anyway. And then he disappeared. The word fell into the silence of the garage and stayed there. Caleb looked at his hands. They were steady. He noticed that and filed it away somewhere in the back of his mind. Grill's people are the ones following you, Caleb said. They've been trying to stop me from finding the recording. They don't know where it is either. Tommy hid it before he disappeared, but they know I've been getting closer. Tonight was the first time they got close enough to use a knife. From outside came the sound Caleb had been listening for, without consciously listening for it, the low hum of a car engine moving slowly on gravel. He's not passing through, slowing down. Dylan heard it too. His body went tight. Back of the shelf, Caleb said quietly. Stay down, don't move unless I tell you. Dylan started to say something. Caleb was already moving toward the front of the garage. There were two of them the first time. Caleb saw them through the gap at the bottom of the rolling door, two pairs of boots on his gravel, moving without hurry, with the particular unhurried confidence of men who expected to find what they were looking for. He straightened up, put his hands in his pockets, and walked to the side door. He opened it and stepped out into the afternoon light like a man with nowhere better to be. The two men stopped. They were younger than he expected, mid-30s, both of them, built like they'd been constructed for intimidation, the same way a truck was constructed for hauling. One had a scar above his left eyebrow. The other had the flat, patient eyes of someone who did unpleasant things professionally and didn't carry the weight of them home. "He's help you," Caleb said. Scarbrow looked at him. "You run this place?" Yep. Seen a motorcycle come through? Big one, Harley. His rider would have been a heavy-set guy, 50s, vest with patches. Caleb tilted his head. Let the silence stretch just a beat, the way a man who's thinking naturally lets silence stretch. "Sure," he said. "Guy came through about 40 minutes ago. Asked about Route 17 south, whether there was a shortcut that avoided the way stations. Flat eyes narrowed. And I told him there wasn't. He bought a Coke from my machine and left." Caleb nodded east. Went that way. The two men looked at each other. Not the look of men who believed him. The look of men deciding whether it was worth the time to push. Mind if we look around?" Scarbrow said. It wasn't really a question. Actually, Caleb said pleasantly. "I do." He kept his hands in his pockets and his voice easy, the particular ease of a man who has thought this through and isn't afraid of where it ends. I've got a customer's truck in there, and I've got tools, and I've got a liability issue if something goes missing. So unless you've got paperwork that says you get to walk through my garage, I'm going to have to say no. Flat Eyes took a step forward. "Listen, friend, I'm not your friend," Caleb said. Same easy tone, and stepping closer to me right now would be a mistake. I've got a cell phone in my pocket and a deputy sheriff whose personal number I've had since we went to school together. And Holt County isn't big enough that two men with no business here go unnoticed for long. It was a bluff. Half a bluff. He did have the deputy's number. He'd used it twice in 15 years. Flat Eyes held still. Scarbrow's jaw worked. 30 seconds passed. 40. Caleb didn't move. He went east. Scarbrow finally said, not to Caleb, to his partner. Left. Caleb waited until the sound of their car engine faded down Route 17 before he went back inside. His heart was hammering in his chest, but his hands, he checked, were still steady. Dylan was pressed against the back wall. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said quietly, or the most reckless. Probably both, Caleb said. They'll be back. They didn't believe me. No, Dylan agreed, they didn't. How long before the others get here? Dylan checked his phone. Raymond's 30 minutes out. Maybe 25. Raymond Maddox? Dylan looked at him. You know him? I know the name. Everyone in 3 counties knew Raymond Maddox. Chapter leader. A man whose reputation had been built over 30 years and who was either a legend or a warning, depending on who was telling the story. He's coming because of me, Dylan said. I called him when I was 12 miles out. He didn't like that I went ahead without backup. Are you in trouble with him? Dylan almost smiled. Ray's going to yell at me for about 10 minutes. Then he's going to make sure I'm okay. That's how it's always been. The almost smile faded. But he's got to get here before Greel's people come back with more people. Then we need to buy 25 minutes, Caleb said. He looked around the garage. At the tools. The truck. The spare parts. The years of accumulated knowledge about how things broke and how they could be put back together. He started making a plan. It was the longest 25 minutes of his life. He moved the F-250 to block the main bay entrance, not all the way, just enough to narrow the approach. He found the old chain he kept for towing and ran it across the back of the property between 2 fence posts. He got the generator from the storage shed and tested it because the lights inside could be cut from the breaker box outside, and he wanted options. Dylan watched all of this from his position behind the shelving. You've thought about this kind of thing before. No, Caleb said. But I spend a lot of time thinking about how things fail and how to compensate for it. Same principle. You're not scared. I'm terrified, Caleb said. He said it without drama, without apology. Just as information. I keep thinking about Sophie, about Patrice picking her up, and whether they'll have enough for dinner, and whether she's going to be upset that I'm not there. That's what I keep thinking about. Dylan was quiet for a moment. And you're still here? Yeah. Why? Caleb considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. He picked up a wrench from the workbench and turned it in his hand. My father told me once that the only choices that matter are the ones you make when doing the right thing costs you something. He said anyone can do the right thing when it's easy. The ones who actually deserve to call themselves decent people are the ones who do it when it isn't. He set the wrench down. You're hurt. You came here. I was hugged. That's it. They came back at 18 minutes, not 2 this time. 4. And they came with enough certainty that they weren't interested in conversation. Caleb heard the cars before he saw them, 2 of them. Coming from different directions. Which told him they'd coordinated. Which told him they were serious. He was at the workbench when the first knock hit the side door. Not a polite knock. The kind that preceded a door being taken off its hinges. Whitmore. The voice outside was different from before. Older. Calmer. The voice of a man giving instructions rather than requests. Open the door. We're not here for you. Give us the man inside, and you go back to your life. Caleb looked at the side door, at the lock he'd checked twice. At the deadbolt that was older than it should be. He walked to the door. He didn't open it. He's not here, he said through the door. We know he's there. His bike is on your property. Bike broke down. He left on foot. You want the bike, you can have it. A pause. You're protecting someone you don't know. Someone who's not from your world. Someone who's brought a problem to your door that you had no part in. Does that make sense to you? Not much in life makes sense, Caleb said. I get by anyway. Longer this time. Then open the door or we open it. Caleb stepped back from the door. He looked at Dylan, who had moved from behind the shelving and was on his feet, which meant the adrenaline was doing the work his body couldn't. They looked at each other across the garage. Don't fight them, Dylan said quietly. Not physically. I know, Caleb said. He went to his workbench and picked up his cell phone. Ease. He dialed the number he'd had for 15 years. The deputy answered on the second ring. Ease. Holt County Sheriff's. This is Deputy Waverly, Travis, Caleb said. Ease. It's Caleb Whitmore. I've got 4 men outside my garage who are about to break in, and I need a car here in the next 10 minutes. Ease. A beat of silence. Caleb, 10 minutes, Travis. I'm not exaggerating. Ease. I'm sending someone. Stay on the line. I can't stay on the line. The side door shuddered. Ease. Just send someone fast. He ended the call. The side door shuddered again. Harder. Ease. And then from somewhere outside, from the direction of Route 17, he heard them. Ease. Motorcycles. Not one. Not two. The particular collective thunder of a group that moved together, that had ridden together long enough to sound like a single entity, like something inevitable coming down a road. Ease. Dylan heard it too. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, something in his face had changed. Ease, Raymond, he said. The sound grew, got closer. Then it got very close, and it was everywhere all around the property, a wall of sound and engine that saturated the air and left no room for anything else. Ease. And then it stopped. The silence after it was enormous. Ease. Caleb heard voices outside. Not words he couldn't make out words, but voices in the particular registrations of men who had arrived somewhere and were deciding what that arrival meant for the people already there. Ease. Then a new knock at his side door, different from before. Ease. Deliberate. Almost formal. Caleb Whitmore. The voice was different from anything he'd heard in the last 25 minutes. Ease. Deep and unhurried and completely without agitation, the voice of a man who had walked into difficult rooms for 30 years and never once found one he couldn't stand in. Ease. Raymond Maddox. I'd like to talk. Caleb looked at Dylan. Ease. Dylan nodded once. Caleb went to the door and opened it. Ease. Raymond Maddox was not what the stories had prepared him for. Ease. He was 61 years old and looked every year of it weathered in the specific way that outdoor men weathered, with deep lines around his eyes and a stillness about him that came not from passivity, but from absolute confidence in his own weight. Ease. He was shorter than Caleb expected and broader across the chest. Ease. His vest was clean. His hands, when he extended one for Caleb to shake, were large and dry and carried the calluses of a man who had worked with them for decades. Ease, Mr. Whitmore, he said. Caleb's fine, Caleb said. Ease. Raymond nodded. He looked past Caleb into the garage, found Dylan, and his expression shifted for just a moment, something between relief and the specific brand of anger that lived right next to care. Ease. You look like hell, Raymond said to Dylan. I've had a rough afternoon, Dylan said. Ease. I'm going to want to talk to you about your decision-making. Raymond looked back at Caleb. Greel's men, 4 of them, Caleb said. 2 came earlier. Ease. They went east, I sent them that way. The other 4 came back about 3 minutes ago. Ease. They were about to break in. Ease. Raymond turned slightly to one of the men behind him. Caleb hadn't looked past Raymond. Ease. But now he did. Ease. And counted 8, 9. Ease. 10 men standing in his lot with the stillness of people who didn't need to move to make a point. Ease. Raymond said something quietly to the nearest man who nodded and moved away. Ease. They'll keep Greel's people company for a while, Raymond said. Ease. He looked back at Caleb. You called the sheriff? He's Deputy Waverly. He's sending a car. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Ease. Good. That's actually good. He seemed to mean it. Ease. Paper trail. We want a paper trail tonight. He studied Caleb again, with that same measuring look Dylan had given him at the beginning. But different Dylan's look had been calculating odds. Ease. Raymond's look was reading something else entirely. Ease. You kept him alive, Raymond said, patched him up. Ease. Turned away Greel's people twice. Did all of that for a man you'd never met. Ease. He needed help, Caleb said. A lot of people need help. Ease. Most of the time, the people who could give it find reasons why they can't. Ease. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. Ease. He looked at Raymond Maddox, at this man whose reputation had preceded him by 30 years, and felt the particular strange calm of someone who has run through all the fear already and come out the other side of it. Ease. My daughter's going to want dinner, Caleb said. She's probably already at Patrice's house. Ease. I need this to be over in time for me to go get her. Ease. Raymond looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since he'd arrived, he smiled. Ease. It was a real smile. Not performed, not practiced, not the professional expression of a man managing a situation. Ease. Something genuine that moved through his face and changed it. Ease. Your daughter's lucky, Raymond said. I'm the lucky one, Caleb said. Ease. Outside, the sound of a deputy's siren moved up Route 17 toward them, cutting through the last of the afternoon light. Ease. Inside the garage, Dylan Carter sat behind the shelving with a patched wound and his phone and a digital file full of things that were about to change several lives. Ease. And he looked at Caleb Whitmore with the expression of a man trying to understand how something like this happened, how an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary garage on an ordinary stretch of road had turned into. Ease. Something that would take him years to fully comprehend. Ease. Raymond Maddox watched Caleb walk toward the siren, toward the arriving deputy, toward the paperwork and the explanations and the long official beginning of the end of Marcus Greel's 11-year operation. Ease. And he kept watching until Caleb disappeared around the corner of the garage. Ease. Then he turned to Dylan. Where'd you find him? Raymond asked. He found me, Dylan said. Raymond nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. Ease. That's how it usually works. Ease. Deputy Travis Waverly was 44 years old, had been with Polk County Sheriff's Department for 19 years, and had seen enough in those 19 years to know when a situation was bigger than the paperwork it was going to generate. Ease. He stood in Caleb's gravel lot with his notepad open and his pen moving and his eyes doing something completely separate from what his hands were doing. His eyes were counting. Ease. 10 bikers, 2 black SUVs with out-of-county plates parked crooked at the edge of the property. Ease. 4 men sitting on the ground next to those SUVs who had the particular stillness of men who had been told very clearly and very quietly to sit and not move. Ease. And Caleb Whitmore, who Travis had known since 3rd grade, standing in the middle of all of it like he'd always lived there. Ease. Walk me through it again, Travis said. 4 men came to my property without my permission and attempted to force entry into my garage, Caleb said. Ease. I called you. You came. That's the version that matters legally. Ease. Travis looked at him over the notepad. Caleb, Travis. Ease. The 4 men sitting on my crime scene currently look like they've been introduced to the ground by somebody with significant experience in that process. Ease. They fell, one of the men behind Raymond said. Nobody laughed. Ease. It wasn't a joke. Travis looked at Raymond Maddox. Ease. Raymond looked back at him with the patient expression of a man who had dealt with law enforcement long enough to know exactly where every line was and exactly how far you could stand from it without crossing. Mr. Maddox, Travis said. Deputy, Raymond said. Ease. You want to tell me what brought you to Red Hollow today? Ease. One of my people was injured on Route 17 and took refuge at this establishment, Raymond said. Ease. We came to make sure he was okay and to deal with the individuals who caused his injury. Ease. Deal with, Travis repeated. In a legal and appropriate manner, Raymond said. Ease. Travis wrote something in his notepad. Caleb suspected it was not a sentence but a series of shapes that gave his hands something to do while his brain processed. Ease. The 4 men on the ground, Travis said. They going to want to file any kind of report? Ease. Silence. Travis looked at the 4 men on the ground. Ease. They looked at nothing in particular. I didn't think so, Travis said. Ease. He closed his notepad. He looked at Caleb for a long moment with the look of a man who had known someone long enough to skip several layers of conversation. Ease. You good? I'm good, Caleb said. Dylan Carter's going to need a hospital. Ease. We have that handled, Raymond said. Travis nodded. Ease. He looked at the lot one more time at all of it, all the pieces of an evening that was going to require a report he was going to have to write very carefully. Then he looked at Caleb. Your dad would have done the same thing, Travis said quietly. Ease. Caleb didn't say anything. Travis got back in his car. Ease. Raymond Maddox had a way of occupying space that Caleb found both unsettling and, in some way he couldn't articulate, deeply reassuring. Ease. He didn't posture, he didn't perform. Ease. He stood in Caleb's garage with a cup of the terrible coffee Caleb had brewed in the ancient machine on the back shelf, and he drank it without commenting on how bad it was, which told Caleb something about the man's fundamental character. Ease. Dylan was on the workbench now, legs hanging, the color coming back to his face in increments. Ease. 2 of Raymond's men had looked at the wound and confirmed Caleb's dressing was holding, which Caleb took as the closest thing to a compliment the evening was going to offer. Ease. Tell me about Greal, Raymond said. Not to Dylan. He's to Caleb. Caleb leaned against the wall opposite him. He's. Why me? Because you live here. You know him the way a community knows someone not from the outside. He's from the inside. Raymond drank his coffee. Dylan knows what Greal has done. I want to know what Greal is. Caleb thought about it. He thought about Marcus Greal at the ribbon cutting for the community center edition, shaking hands with both sides of every disagreement in the room, the smile that was always exactly calibrated to the moment. He thought about Denny Park, who owned the hardware store on Clement Street for 30 years, and one afternoon had 3 separate code violations cited simultaneously and a banknote called, and no explanation for any of it. Who had come to Caleb's garage 2 years later, driving a car with a check engine light he couldn't afford to fix. He's smart, Caleb said. That's the first thing. He doesn't get his hands dirty directly, he never has. There's always a layer between him and whatever he needs done. The people who work for him are loyal because they're paid well and because they're afraid, and those two things together are hard to separate from each other. What does the town think of him? Half of them think he's a good man who does things for the community. The other half suspects something's wrong, but can't point to anything specific, and in a town this size, suspicion without specifics doesn't go anywhere. And you, Raymond said. What do you think? I think he destroyed a family I knew, Caleb said. I think he did it methodically and legally, and with other people's hands, and I think he slept perfectly well afterward. He paused. I think the world will be different when he can't do that anymore. Raymond held Caleb's gaze for a moment, then he turned to Dylan. The recording, where are we? Dylan's expression shifted into something more focused. Tommy Reese hid it before he disappeared. I know he hid it digitally, not a physical device, not something that could be taken from him. He uploaded it somewhere that requires a specific access sequence. I have 2 of the 3 pieces of that sequence. The third piece, he told me once, months before everything went wrong, that he'd left it somewhere that would make sense to the right person. What does that mean? Raymond said. I've been trying to figure that out for 6 weeks. Caleb looked at Dylan. Something snagged in the back of his mind, the particular sensation of a connection forming between 2 things that looked unrelated. What did he say exactly? Caleb asked. When he told you that? Dylan looked at him. He said, if anything happens to me, the answer's in the last honest place I know. Quiet. That was it? Caleb said. Caleb was still. Did you know Tommy Reese? Personally? I knew him. Yeah, what kind of person was he? Dylan thought about it. Young. Idealistic. The kind of kid who still believed systems were supposed to work and was genuinely outraged when they didn't. He'd grown up here in Red Hollow. Moved away for a few years, came back when his mother got sick. He was working at the county assessor's office when he stumbled onto Greal's operation. He didn't go looking for it. It came to him through paperwork that didn't add up. Something crystallized in Caleb's mind. He felt it happen, a specific, almost physical sensation of pieces clicking into alignment. He grew up here, Caleb said. Yeah, his mother got sick. He came back to take care of her. She passed last year. Before he disappeared. Caleb pushed off the wall. Dylan frowned. Reese. Carol Reese. Why? Caleb picked up his phone and pulled up a contact. He stared at it for a moment. Then he looked at Raymond, then at Dylan. Carol Reese was a patient of Dr. Howard Briggs, he said. Doc Briggs has been the only doctor in Red Hollow for 35 years. He retired 8 months ago. When he retired, he donated his office building to the community, turned it into a resource center. His town library took over half of it. He stopped. Raymond set his coffee cup down. The last honest place I know, Dylan said quietly. A 35-year-old doctor's office, Caleb said. Where a woman dying of cancer was treated by the one man in this town who Greal never got to. Because Briggs didn't want anything Greal could offer and had enough in savings that he couldn't be pressured. Caleb looked at Dylan. If Tommy Reese grew up here, if his mother was one of Briggs's patients, if he trusted anyone in this town. He trusted Briggs, Dylan finished. Raymond was already looking at the man to his right. Get the car. Wait, Caleb said. Everyone looked at him. It's 9:30 at night, Caleb said. The resource center is closed. Please. If you pull up to that building right now with 10 motorcycles and try to get inside, you're going to have Travis back on the radio within 4 minutes, and whatever goodwill we have left from tonight evaporates. He let that settle. Also, Greel's people followed Dylan to Red Hollow. That means they know Dylan was looking for something here. If they're watching that building, Raymond looked at him steadily. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting one person goes, Caleb said. Someone who belongs in this town. Someone who can knock on Doc Briggs's door at 9:30 at night and have it be unremarkable. You, Raymond said. Me, Caleb said. Dylan leaned forward. Caleb, if Greel's people are watching, then they see a mechanic going to visit an old doctor, Caleb said. Which is exactly what they'll see, because that's exactly what it is. He looked at Raymond. I need Doc Briggs's address. I don't have it, Raymond said. I do, Caleb said. I've had it for years. He saved my daughter's life when she was 2 years old and had a fever that spiked too fast for the hospital. I know where Howard Briggs lives. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the side door. Stay here. Keep the lights on. Make it look like this is still where the action is. Raymond watched him. The measuring look again, but it had changed again. It wasn't calculating or reading anymore. It was something that looked, on a face like Raymond Maddox's, surprisingly like trust. You find anything, Raymond said. You called Dylan's number. I will. And Caleb. Raymond's voice was level, but there was something underneath it. Be careful. Greel's people are not careful people. Neither am I, Caleb said. When it counts. He walked out into the night. Howard Briggs was 73 years old and had the energy of a man who had spent decades saving it up for retirement and was now releasing it in careful increments. He answered his door in a cardigan and reading glasses and held a book with one finger marking his place. And when he saw Caleb Whitmore on his porch at 9:30 at night, he did not look alarmed. He looked like a man who had been answering his door at unexpected hours for 35 years and had lost the capacity for being surprised by it. Caleb, he said. Sophie's fine. I need to talk to you about Tommy Reese. Howard Briggs went very still. The book closed in his hand. Come in, he said. The conversation lasted 40 minutes and covered everything Caleb needed it to cover and several things he hadn't expected. Howard Briggs sat across from him in a living room full of books and the accumulated evidence of a life spent reading and listening. And he spoke carefully, the way doctors speak with precision and without flinching from the parts that were hard. Tommy Reese had come to him 4 months before he disappeared. Not as a patient. As a young man who had grown up watching Howard Briggs treat his mother with patience and dignity through a long illness, and who had decided that if there was anyone in Red Hollow he could trust with something important, it was the doctor who hadn't billed his mother for the last 6 months of her treatment because he knew the family couldn't pay. He was frightened, Howard said. He tried not to show it, but he was very frightened. He told me he had something that needed to be safe, that it couldn't be on his devices, couldn't be connected to him, couldn't be somewhere that could be searched. What did you do? Caleb asked. I let him leave something with me. Howard stood from his chair and moved to the bookcase. He ran his finger along a row of old medical references until he found the one he was looking for, a battered copy of a pharmacological guide from 2003 that had not, Caleb suspected, been consulted for its pharmaceutical content in many years. He opened it. Inside, in the hollow pages, was a folded piece of paper and a small plastic card. Howard held them out to Caleb. He said if anyone ever came looking anyone the right person sent, they'd know to ask about Carol, Howard said. He said his mother's name was the last password. He said she was the last honest thing he knew. Caleb looked at the items in the old doctor's hand. The paper had a URL and 2 alphanumeric strings written in small, careful handwriting. The plastic card had a 3rd string on it. Did you look at it? Caleb asked. No, Howard said simply. He trusted me with it. That means I don't look. Caleb took the items. His hand was steady. He thought about Tommy Reese, 26 years old and brave and scared. Hiding something important in a pharmacology book in a retired doctor's house, because this was the last honest place he knew, and he felt the weight of that in a way he hadn't expected to. He disappeared, Caleb said. I know. Howard's voice was even. I read about it. I hope someone was looking. Someone was, Caleb said. Someone is. He stood up. Howard stood with him and walked him to the door and then stopped with his hand on the frame and looked at Caleb the way he'd looked at him when Sophie was 2 years old and her fever had broken. With the expression of a man who had seen enough of the world's machinery to know when something was turning the right direction. Your father would have done this, Howard said. People keep telling me that tonight, Caleb said. There are worse things to keep being told. Caleb walked back out into the night with 3 alphanumeric strings in his pocket and the feeling that the world was about to lurch in a direction it hadn't been going before. He called Dylan's number before he was off Howard Street. Dylan answered on the first ring. Tell me I have it, Caleb said. All 3 pieces, paper with 2 strings and a card with the third. Silence. The kind of silence that had texture. Caleb. Dylan's voice came out differently than it had before. Lower. Like he was handling something fragile. You actually have it. I actually have it. Get back here. Then muffled. Away from the phone, Raymond. He has it. Caleb was halfway back to the garage when he noticed the car. It was parked without lights 2 blocks from Howard Street. And it moved when he moved, not dramatically. Not fast. But with the particular, deliberate laziness of something that wanted to stay close without announcing itself. He didn't look directly at it. He kept walking. Kept his pace even. Turned the corner toward the garage. And thought about what it meant. They'd been watching Howard's house, which meant they'd already figured out what Caleb had just figured out, or close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. He walked faster. He got back to the garage and went straight to Dylan. We have a problem. I had a tail coming back. They may have figured out about Briggs. Raymond was already moving. Did they see you go in? I don't know. Maybe. Caleb put the paper and the card on the workbench. How fast can you access this? Dylan looked at the strings. He pulled out his phone. These are access credentials for an encrypted cloud archive. I need a secure connection. He looked at Raymond. Marco's phone has the VPN. Marco, Raymond said without raising his voice. The man appeared from the doorway. While Marco got his phone configured and Dylan started accessing the archive, Caleb stood at the side door and listened to the lot. Raymond came to stand beside him. How many do you think? Raymond asked quietly. 1 car that I saw. Doesn't mean 1 car total. Raymond nodded. We move the moment Dylan has confirmation. Where? Somewhere that isn't here. Raymond looked at him. Your daughter, Patrice's house. 3 miles north. We'll have 2 men outside it within 10 minutes. Caleb looked at him. You don't have to yes, Raymond said. We do. He said it the way someone says something that isn't up for discussion, not unkindly. Just absolutely. You protected one of ours. That means something. I'm not explaining it. I'm just telling you. From across the garage, Dylan's voice cut through. I'm in. Both of them crossed the garage in seconds. Dylan had the archive open on Marco's phone. And the contents were loading files, folders, audio. A systematic and clearly organized collection of documents that had been built by someone who understood that evidence was only as good as its organization. Audio file, Dylan said. He hit play. The recording was 47 seconds of conversation in a room that had ambient noise ventilation, maybe a refrigerator somewhere. 2 voices. One of them Marco's Creole. Caleb had heard that voice at every public event in Red Hollow for a decade. He knew it the way you knew the sound of a familiar engine. Smooth. The voice of someone accustomed to being agreed with. The other voice was younger, anxious, asking whether they were sure about the Park family. Whether there was another option. And Marcus Greal. Smooth and controlled and absolutely certain, saying, there is no other option. Make it clear to them that the next step involves their children's school. And if that doesn't work, we move to the store. I want it done before the end of the month. The The hardware store on Clement Street had burned down on the 28th. Ease. Dylan stopped the recording. Nobody spoke. That's it, Dylan said. Ease. His voice was not triumphant. It was something much quieter than triumph, the particular exhausted relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally been able to set it down. Ease. That's everything. Send it, Raymond said. I have 3 contacts. Ease. Federal contacts. I've been building this for 8 months, and they've been waiting. Dylan's fingers moved over the phone. I'm attaching the full archive to a prepared message. He paused. Once I send this, there's no unsending it. Send it, Raymond said again. Dylan looked at Caleb. Caleb thought about Denny Park and his check engine light and the 30-year hardware store that was now a vacant lot with a chain-link fence around it. He thought about Tommy Reese, 26 years old, hiding a file in a pharmacology book in an old doctor's house, and disappearing 6 weeks later. He thought about his daughter at Patrice's house, probably asleep by now, waiting for him to come home. Send it, Caleb said. Dylan pressed send. For a moment, the garage was completely silent. Then from outside came the sound of a car engine. And then 2. And then voices. And then Raymond turned and said something to his men, and the garage became a different kind of quiet. The focused quiet of people who knew what was coming and had decided what to do about it. They're going to come in. Caleb's, Raymond said. For the device. Yes, but it doesn't matter now. It won't matter in about 30 seconds, Raymond said. But it's going to feel like it matters for the next few minutes. So stay behind Dylan and let my people handle what needs to be handled, and don't be a hero. Caleb looked at him. I thought I already was one. Raymond almost smiled. Heroes get to rest after the hard part, he said. You're not there yet. The side door came open. The lock Caleb had meant to replace for 2 years finally failed at the worst possible moment, and the first of Greel's men came through with the confidence of someone who has calculated odds and liked the result. What he found was Raymond Maddox, 3 feet from the door, arms at his sides. Completely still. With the collective weight of 10 men who had been in worse situations than this, standing at various points around the garage. The man stopped. The man behind him ran into him. The device is already transmitted, Raymond said calmly. Whatever you came here to stop, you're about 3 minutes too late. So you have a choice right now that's going to determine a significant portion of your near future. You can make a decision you can't undo. Or you can step back outside and wait for the same federal investigators who are currently reading a very detailed file about Marcus Greel's operation to ask you some questions that, depending on how you answer them, might result in a conversation about what you personally knew and when. Silence, doors behind you, Raymond said. I'd use it. The man looked at Raymond, looked at the room, looked at the math. He backed out. The door swung shut. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Dylan was already on his phone. Talking rapidly names. Specifics. The confirmation code that told his federal contacts the archive was live. Around him, Raymond's men moved with the efficiency of people doing something they'd done before. Securing the space. Checking the perimeter. Communicating in the shorthand of people who'd worked together long enough to need very few words. Caleb sat down on his work stool. His legs, he realized, had been waiting for permission to do that for about 2 hours. Raymond walked over and stood next to him. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there, which felt in a way Caleb couldn't have predicted, like exactly the right thing. It's going to be a long night, Raymond said finally. Federals will want statements. There'll be questions about the timeline, about Howard Briggs, about what was accessed and when. It won't be over tonight, I know, Caleb said. You're going to want a lawyer. I know a guy in Tucson. Good. Raymond looked at him. How are you doing, actually? Caleb thought about it. He thought about the last several hours, the compressed and strange and completely unrepeatable hours of a Tuesday evening that had started with a Ford F-250 and motor oil and a radio playing something sad. I need to call Patrice, he said. I need to know Sophie's asleep and okay. Call her, Raymond said. Caleb called. Patrice answered on the second ring with the voice of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this call and had been determined not to make it herself. "Please." Sophie was asleep, she said. Had eaten 2 bowls of pasta and fallen asleep on the couch during a movie about talking animals. "Please." She was fine. She didn't know anything was wrong. "Thank you," Caleb said. "Please, I'll be there as soon as I can." "Please." He ended the call and held the phone in his hand and sat on his work stool in his garage with the smell of motor oil and old coffee and the still present adrenaline of an evening that had broken every ordinary expectation. "Please." And he thought about his father's voice saying the same words 2 different people had said to him tonight. "Please." The choices that cost you something. He looked up. "Please." Raymond was still there. When Tommy Reese disappeared, Caleb said, "Please." Do you think he knew it might happen? Raymond considered the question seriously. "Please." I think men like Tommy Reese always know, he said. "Please." I think they do the thing anyway. I think that's what makes them worth finding. "Please." Dylan lowered his phone from his ear. His face was doing something complicated, something that had grief and relief tangled up together in a way that didn't resolve cleanly into either one. "Please." "It's confirmed," he said. "They have everything. Warrants are being prepared tonight." He looked at Caleb. "Please." Marcus Greal is going to have federal agents at his door before sunrise. "Please." The garage absorbed that. Outside, one by one, Greal's cars were leaving the lot. "Please." Not fleeing exactly, just the particular departure of people who had run the calculation and found that the numbers no longer worked in their favor. "Please." Caleb stood up from the stool. He walked to the corner of his workbench, to the spot where his daughter had taped a crayon drawing of a horse because she said the garage needed color. "Please." He looked at it for a moment, the too large head, the 4 legs that didn't quite align, the enormous impractical smile she'd given the horse because she gave smiles to everything she drew. "Please." He put his hand on the drawing. "Okay," he said. To no one in particular. "Please." To himself. "Okay." Behind him, in the garage that smelled like oil and bad coffee, in the specific aftermath of a very hard evening, "Please." Raymond Maddox watched Caleb Whitmore put his hand on a crayon drawing and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, something that might have been, if he'd been the kind of man who used the word easily, hope. "Please." The federal agents arrived at 4:17 in the morning. "Please." Not the cautious, "we'll be in touch" kind of federal arrival that movies depicted. No slow-rolling sedans, no men in dark suits stepping out one at a time with briefcases. This was 6 agents in 3 vehicles who moved with the particular organized urgency of people who had been waiting for a file to land in their inbox for 8 months and had it land at 11:43 at night and had been moving ever since. Please. Their lead agent was a woman named Sandra Cho, 40-something, with close-cropped hair and the specific brand of exhaustion that came not from sleeplessness, but from caring about something for a very long time. Please. She shook Dylan's hand first, then Raymond's. Then she looked at Caleb and said, "You're the mechanic." "Yes, that's me," Caleb said. "You went to Howard Briggs's house." "Yes, I did." At 9:30 at night, he was awake. "Yes." Sandra Cho looked at him for a moment with the look of someone reassessing a situation they thought they'd already assessed. "Yes." "Okay," she said. "I'm going to need a full statement from you." "Yes." "Everything from the moment Dylan Carter arrived at your property." "Yes, I figured," Caleb said. "It's going to take a while." "Yes, I figured that too." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to a smile, but the attempt was there. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, I want you to understand something before we start. Please, what you did tonight going to Briggs, retrieving those credentials, getting them back here while being followed, that wasn't nothing. Please, that was the piece we didn't have. We had Dylan's testimony, we had the transaction records, we had 2 cooperating witnesses who were terrified and had been terrified for months. Please. But the recording was the thing that closed every door Greal's lawyers could have walked through." She paused. "Please. Tommy Reese hid that file 8 weeks ago because he trusted the right people in the right order. Please. You were the last person in that chain, you should know that." "Please." Caleb sat with that for a moment. "Please." He thought about Tommy Reese again, the 26-year-old who'd grown up in Red Hollow and come back for his mother, and stumbled onto something he couldn't unsee and done something about it, even though it cost him everything. Please. He thought about the chain Sandra Cho was describing, the invisible thread that ran from Tommy to Howard Briggs, to a hollow pharmacology book, to a mechanic who'd stayed in his garage when everyone would have understood if he'd left. Did you find him? Caleb asked. Tommy Reese. Do you know where he is? Ease. Sandra Cho's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Ease. We have a lead, she said carefully. That's all I can tell you right now. Ease, it wasn't enough, but it was something. Ease. Caleb filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things that weren't resolved yet and turned back to the business of statements and timelines and the careful reconstruction of an evening that had started with a Ford F-250 and motor oil and ended. Ease. Somewhere he couldn't have imagined when the day began. Ease. Raymond's men left in stages. Not all at once that would have looked like a retreat, and Raymond Maddox did not retreat. Ease. They peeled off in groups of 2 and 3 over the course of 2 hours, each departure timed to the rhythm of something Caleb couldn't hear, but Raymond clearly could. Ease. By 2 in the morning, there were 4 of them left. Ease. And by 3:30, there were 2. Ease. And by the time Sandra Cho's people arrived, Ease. The only Hell's Angels still in Caleb's garage were Raymond himself and Dylan. Ease. Who had declined transportation to the hospital 3 times and was now sitting in the old lawn chair Caleb kept for customers who wanted to wait during long jobs. Ease. You need a doctor, Caleb told him, for the 4th time. Ease. I need to see this through, Dylan said, for the 4th time. Ease. Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive. They are at 4 in the morning in Red Hollow, Arizona. Ease. Caleb couldn't argue with the geography of it. The statement he gave Sandra Cho took an hour and 20 minutes. Ease. She was thorough without being aggressive, which he appreciated. Ease. She had a way of asking questions that left room in them. She wasn't leading him toward a specific answer. Ease. She was genuinely trying to understand the sequence of decisions that had led a single father with no connection to any of this to end up in the middle of it. Ease. He told her everything in the order it happened. Ease. And she wrote it down and asked clarifying questions, and occasionally nodded at something he said with an expression that meant she was fitting a piece into a larger picture she'd been working on for a long time. Ease. When he was finished, she sat back and looked at her notes. Ease. One more question, she said, and it's not official, I'm just asking as a person. Ease. Okay, Caleb said. Ease. When those men came back the 2nd time, Ease, she said. Ease. The 4 of them. Ease. And they told you to hand Dylan over what went through your mind. Ease. Walk me through it. Ease. Caleb thought about it honestly. I thought about Sophie, he said. Ease. First thing, every time, no matter what I thought about her. Ease. What it would mean if something happened to me. Whether I was making a decision she'd have to live with. Ease. And then I thought about the fact that she's 7 years old and she watches everything I do. Ease. She doesn't know she's watching, but she is. Kids always are. He paused. Ease. I thought about what kind of man I wanted her to remember. Ease. And I thought about the man I'd already decided to be a long time ago, before any of this happened. Ease. And those 2 things were the same man, so. Sandra Cho looked at him. So, she repeated quietly. So I didn't hand him over, Caleb said. Ease. Marcus Greal was arrested at 5:41 in the morning. Ease. Caleb didn't witness it. He was at Patrice's house by then. Ease. Sitting in her kitchen with a cup of coffee that was significantly better than his own, while Patrice sat across from him and listened to everything with the careful attention of a woman who had lived next to Caleb Whitmore for 11 years. And Ease understood that he was not a dramatic person and that if he was telling her this, it had happened exactly this way. Ease. When he finished, she sat back and looked at him for a long moment. He's your father, she said. I know, he said. He would have. Ease. I know, Patrice. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. Ease. Just for a moment. Then she got up and refilled his coffee without being asked. Ease. He went in to check on Sophie at 6:15. She was asleep on the pull-out couch, one arm thrown over a stuffed dog she'd had since she was 3, her hair across her face in the particular chaos of children who sleep with total commitment. Ease. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and felt the specific ease, enormous relief of knowing she was okay, that she was here. Ease. That she was safe. Ease. That the thing that mattered most in his life had been protected by the choices of the night before, even though she would never know it. Ease. He didn't wake her. He went back to the kitchen and drank his coffee and waited for the sun to come up. The news about Greal moved through Red Hollow, the way news moved through a small town, not through media, not through official announcements, but through the network of people who knew other people who knew things, the invisible system of connection that held a community together, whether the community acknowledged it or not. By 7:30 in the morning, people who'd been awake for various reasons knew. By 9, people who'd turned on their radios knew. By 10, it was the only conversation happening in the diner across from Caleb's garage. Caleb was back at the garage by 8. He'd gone home, first showered, changed. Stood in his kitchen for 10 minutes, looking at nothing in particular, while the weight of the previous night settled into his body the way adrenaline always settled eventually, like sediment dropping to the bottom of a glass. Then he'd gone to the garage, because the garage was where he went, and because there was still a Ford F-250 with a suspension problem that needed finishing, and because he needed the normalcy of it. He was under the truck at 8:45 when he heard the motorcycle. He didn't slide out immediately this time. He finished tightening the bolt he was working on, set down the wrench, and slid out. Raymond Maddox was standing in the center of the garage. Alone this time, without the 10 men, without the occasion. Just a man in a vest with road dust on it and a cup of coffee from the diner across the street that he held out to Caleb. They have better coffee over there, Raymond said. Everyone has better coffee than me, Caleb said. He took the cup. Dylan get to the hospital? 4 this morning. 7 stitches. He's already arguing with the doctor about discharge. Sounds right. Raymond looked around the garage. At the tools, the truck, the crayon horse. He seemed to be taking his time with it, not the rapid tactical assessment of the night before, but something more deliberate. Like he was learning the space. Greal's been arrested, Raymond said. I heard. 3 of his people rolled over before sunrise. Apparently, when you give frightened men the choice between cooperation and whatever Greal had been threatening them with, they choose cooperation. He paused. The federal charges include racketeering, extortion, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy in connection with property destruction. The Park family's hardware store. Caleb absorbed this. And Tommy Reese. Raymond's expression shifted, careful, measured. They found him, he said. Last night before the arrests. He's alive. The words hit Caleb in the chest like a physical thing. He'd been braced for the other answer, had been braced for it, since Dylan had said the word disappeared 6 weeks ago, with that particular flatness that sometimes meant one thing and sometimes meant another. Where? He asked. A property 2 counties over. Greal had him confined, not harmed, not yet but confined. He needed Tommy alive in case the file surfaced, and he needed a way to discredit it. A living source he could claim was compromised was worth more to him than the alternative. Raymond's voice was even, but his jaw was tight. He's been in federal protective custody since midnight. He'll testify. Caleb put one hand on the truck behind him. Not because he needed support exactly, but because he needed to touch something solid. He's 26 years old, Caleb said. He is. He was in that property while I was walking to Howard Briggs's house. He was. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the specific geometry of the previous night, the distances, the timing, the chain of choices that had each led to the next, with the accumulated logic of a thing that had been building for months. Tommy Reese locked in a property 2 counties over while his file, his evidence, his act of terrified courage waited in a hollow book for someone to come find it. The narrowness of it. How many different things could have gone a different way? He's going to be okay, Raymond said, not as reassurance exactly as fact. The people I know in that space, they take care of their witnesses. Good, Caleb said. He picked up his coffee, then set it down, then picked it up again. Good, Raymond watched him work through it. He didn't rush the silence. You want to know something? Raymond said after a while. Sure, I've been in this life for 31 years. I've met men who called themselves brave and weren't. And men who were brave and didn't know it. And men who were brave and knew it, but didn't care about it. One way or the other, it was just a thing they were. He's like being tall or left-handed. He drank his coffee. You're the third kind. Caleb looked at him. I was scared the whole time. I know. That's what I'm telling you. Caleb turned that over. He didn't have an answer for it, so he didn't try to make one. What happens to Dylan now? He asked. He goes back to his chapter, Raymond said. Does what he does. Probably argues with one more doctor before the week is out. A pause. He wanted to come today. I told him he was in no condition. He didn't like that. He never likes anything I tell him. Something passed across Raymond's face, a warmth that was entirely genuine, entirely unperformed. He's been with my chapter for 11 years. He was the one who first came to me about Greel's operation, brought it to me before he brought it anywhere else. Said he wasn't going to move on it without telling me first. Raymond shook his head slowly. He has a particular kind of stubbornness, the kind that looks like recklessness, but is actually just conviction. He went alone, Caleb said. Yesterday, he came in alone and injured. Yes. Why? Raymond looked at him because he was trying to protect the rest of us. He thought if he moved fast enough, got the credentials and got out, he could keep Greel's people contained to just him. He paused. He was wrong about that, but the impulse wasn't wrong. Caleb thought about that. About the specific logic of it, a man choosing to absorb danger rather than spread it, making himself the target to protect the people around him. He thought about the way that kind of loyalty worked, how it wasn't always clean or strategic or even sensible, how it often looked from the outside like something else entirely. You should have seen this town before last night, Caleb said. You should have seen the way people moved around Greel. The careful nothing, the way everyone knew something was wrong, and nobody said it out loud, because saying it out loud cost too much. He looked at Raymond. Denny Park came into this garage 2 years ago with a check engine light and a car that was held together with prayer. He couldn't afford the repair. We worked something out. He never told me what happened to the store. He didn't have to. I knew. Raymond nodded. What happened to him? He moved to Flagstaff. His son-in-law had a business there. He's okay, I think. Last I heard, Caleb set his coffee down, but he shouldn't have had to move. That store was 30 years of his life, and Greel took it with code violations and a called note and a conversation nobody could prove happened. He stopped. Until last night. Until last night, Raymond agreed. It was mid-morning when Dylan arrived anyway. He walked into the garage under his own power, which was either impressive or foolish depending on your frame of reference. And he moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who had been told by a doctor not to do something and had decided the doctor's expertise extended only so far. He had 7 new stitches and a bruise along his left jaw that hadn't been visible the night before, and the expression of someone who had been awake for too many consecutive hours and was running on the specific fuel of people who needed to see something through to its end. Raymond looked at him. I told you I know what you told me, Dylan said. He looked at Caleb. I needed to come. Caleb looked at him. The man standing in his garage was not the same as the man who had pulled up on a motorcycle the previous afternoon, same body. Same vest. Same face. But carrying something differently. The wound was the same, but the weight had changed. Sit down, Caleb said. He got the lawn chair. Dylan sat. He looked around the garage with the same careful attention Raymond had given it, as though he was trying to understand what kind of place this was by reading its details. His eyes landed on the crayon horse. Sophie draw that? He asked. About a year ago. She went through a horse phase. Dylan looked at it for a moment. How old is she? 7. She know about last night? No. She was asleep at Patrice's. Dylan nodded. He seemed to be making peace with something, arranging things inside himself, the way you arrange furniture in a room that had suddenly gotten more complicated. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to hear it like I mean it, not like it's something people say. Okay, Caleb said. What you did last night staying when I told you there were men coming. Turning those 2 away with nothing but a steady voice and a half bluff about a deputy you hadn't called yet. Going to Briggs's house alone with someone following you. Getting those credentials back here. Dylan stopped. There was a moment early on when you first brought me inside. I thought about telling you to call someone else. Please, anyone else. I thought you were going to be a liability. Fair enough, Caleb said. I was wrong, Dylan said. I've been in situations where people said they'd hold the line and didn't. I've watched men with reputations in training fold when it got real. You had no reputation, no training, no reason to stay. And you stayed. He looked at Caleb directly, the kind of direct that doesn't include a way out of it. I've been riding for 24 years. I know what it means to stand for something. And I'm telling you what you did last night means something. Not just to me, to what I believe about people. Caleb looked at his hands. The steady hands. You came through my door needing help, he said. That's all it was. That's not all it was, Raymond said from where he stood. No, Dylan agreed. It wasn't. Caleb looked between them. Two men who had spent their lives inside a world built on loyalty and the weight of choosing who deserved it, telling him his choice had mattered. He didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't built for the receiving end of this particular conversation, and the fact that he wasn't built for it was probably the reason they were having it. Sandra Cho called me an hour ago. Caleb said, changing the subject because he needed to. She said they're going to need me available for testimony if it goes to trial. Said it probably would. It will, Dylan said. Greel's lawyers are good, but not good enough. Not against a recording, she also said. Stopped. What? Raymond asked. She said Tommy Reese asked about me. When they found him. He asked if the person who went to Briggs's house was okay. Silence. He didn't know who it was, Caleb continued. Briggs hadn't told him anyone's name. He didn't know anyone was going to come. Tommy just knew that if the file had been retrieved, someone had gone to the right place and asked the right question. And the first thing he asked was whether that person was okay. Dylan looked at the floor. Raymond looked at the wall. Caleb gave them both a moment. He gave himself one too. He's 26 years old, Caleb said again. He'd said it before to Raymond, and he was saying it again, because the fact still hadn't fully resolved into something he knew how to carry. He did all of that when he was 25. Some people are built for it young, Raymond said quietly. You were? Caleb asked. Raymond considered. I was built for the wrong things young, he said. Took me a while to figure out which ones were worth building toward. He looked at Caleb. You figured it out sooner. I had a good teacher, Caleb said. He died when I was 32. But I had him for 32 years, and some of it stuck. Nobody said anything for a while. The garage was quiet in the morning way, the workaday sounds of Route 17 outside. The occasional passing truck. The radio that Caleb had turned on, at some point playing something country and sad, which was its natural register. Dylan shifted in the lawn chair and winced and tried not to show it. The recording, he said. I heard it, Caleb said. What did you think? I thought he sounded like every man who's ever been too comfortable, Caleb said. The specific kind of comfortable where you stop believing consequences apply to you. He paused. I thought about Denny Park. About the fact that Greel said children's school like it was a negotiating tool. A leverage stopped again. I thought about Sophie. Dylan nodded. He's done. Whatever his lawyers do. Whatever delays they manufacture the recording. The transaction trail. The witnesses. Tommy's all's testimony. He's done. He should have been done 11 years ago, Caleb said. Yeah, Dylan said he should have. The weight of that sat in the garage with them. The weight of 11 years of people who'd paid and lost and moved away and stayed silent and been afraid. All of it running on a current that ended last night in a garage on Route 17 because a wounded man had pulled up on a motorcycle and a single father with tired blue eyes had decided not to look away. Caleb stood up. He went to the workbench. He picked up a wrench because having something in his hands helped him think and talk at the same time, which was a mechanic's habit he'd never been able to break. There's going to be fallout, he said, for the town. For the people who paid Greel because they had to. For the businesses that are still standing because they found ways to make it work. There's going to be a period where people have to decide what to do with the fact that they knew something was wrong and waited for someone else to be the one to do something about it. There always is, Raymond said. I'm not judging them, Caleb said. I understand it. I had my own moments last night where I thought about just not being the one. He turned the wrench in his hand. Please. But I think the town's going to need something after this. Please. Something to replace what Greil took. Not just buildings and businesses, but the sense that doing the right thing is worth it. Please. Raymond looked at him. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, Caleb said honestly. Please. Something. Something that uses what happened instead of trying to bury it. He set the wrench down. This town has a story now about what one person's choice can start. One person's choice and a lot of help, Dylan said. Yeah, Caleb said. That too. Dylan pushed himself up from the lawn chair slowly, carefully, with the particular economy of motion of someone working around a wound. He stood and looked at Caleb across the garage with the late morning light coming through the gaps in the door, the same light that had been there yesterday when none of this had happened yet. I want to come back, Dylan said, when I'm not bleeding. Caleb looked at him. To Red Hollow? To this garage. Dylan's voice was straightforward. I want to come back and have a normal conversation that doesn't involve federal archives or men with knives. I want to see what this place looks like when it's just a place. Caleb thought about that. About what this garage was on an ordinary day, the smell of oil. The radio. The occasional customer. The crayon horse in the corner. Sophie dropping by after school sometimes and doing her homework on the spare parts shelf because she liked the noise and the company. It's not much, Caleb said. I've seen a lot of what's much, Dylan said. Right now this garage looks like the best place I know. Raymond picked up his coffee from where he'd set it on the workbench and finished the last of it and set the cup down with the finality of a man who has concluded something. We'll leave you to your truck, he said. The suspension's not going to fix itself, Caleb agreed. Raymond extended his hand. Caleb shook it, and the handshake was different from the one the previous night at the side door. That one had been the handshake of a man assessing another man. This one was the handshake of equals, which was a different thing entirely, and both of them knew it. Dylan shook his hand too, and held it a beat longer. I'll call when I'm out of the hospital system. Don't argue with the doctor too much, Caleb said. I make no promises, Dylan said. They left. The sound of Raymond's motorcycle starting and Dylan's carefully, at low throttle, with the particular gentleness of someone who knew where his stitches were, came through the garage walls, and then faded down Route 17 toward wherever they were going, back to their world, which last night had briefly and completely overlapped with his. Caleb stood alone in the garage. He looked at the Ford F-250. He looked at the tools. He looked at the crayon horse. He picked up the wrench. He got back under the truck. Because the Ford F-250 still had a suspension problem, and he'd promised the owner it would be ready by Thursday, and Thursday was tomorrow. And the world, whatever the world had done last night, and whatever it was still doing out there in the complicated aftermath of all those choices, the world still ran on the ordinary promises of ordinary people. And he had never once been someone who didn't keep his. He worked for 20 minutes in the quiet of his garage before he heard at his phone on the workbench. He slid out and looked at the screen, an unknown number. A 202 area code. Washington, he answered. Mr. Whitmore, said a voice he didn't recognize. He's measured, official, but not unfriendly. My name is Agent Prentice. I'm working with Sandra Cho's team on the Greil investigation. I wanted to call personally because there's a development I thought you'd want to hear about before it becomes public. Caleb stood very still. Okay, Marcus Greil's legal team made a statement this morning, Prentice said. They're claiming their client will cooperate fully with investigators in exchange for consideration. They appear to believe that cooperation will include disclosure of other operations, other people connected to the network Greil was part of. How big? Caleb asked. A pause that told him the answer before the words did. Bigger than Red Hollow, Prentice said. Significantly bigger. What Greal was running in 3 counties was a franchise, Mr. Whitmore. The recording you helped recover last night, it's not just the end of Marcus Greal. It's the thread that unravels a much larger operation. Caleb sat down on his work stool. He looked at his hands. Still steady. Tommy Reese, he said. When he stumbled onto Greal's paperwork, did he know it went further than Greal? We believe he suspected it. We believe that's part of why he was so frightened. A pause. He was 25 years old working in a county assessor's office, Mr. Whitmore, and he found the edge of something very large, and he had the courage to pull at it. And he paid for it, Caleb said. He did. Prentice's voice didn't pretend around it. But because of what he did, and because of what you did last night, the people who can finish with what he started now have what they need. Caleb looked at the crayon horse in the corner of his garage. At the enormous impractical smile his daughter had drawn on it, because she gave smiles to everything she drew. Is he going to have to testify? Caleb asked. Tommy. Almost certainly. Make sure someone tells him he's not alone in it, Caleb said. Make sure someone actually tells him that. Not just make sure. A long pause. I will personally make sure of that, Prentice said. They ended the call. Caleb set the phone down on the workbench. He sat on the stool in his garage for a long time without moving, without picking up a tool, without turning the radio up or down. Just sitting with the information and what it meant, and the way things kept expanding from the single point of a Tuesday afternoon decision that had seemed at the time almost simple. A man came through the door needing help. That was what he'd told Raymond. That was what it had been, at its root, its simple root. A man came through the door needing help, and Caleb had been there, and Caleb had stayed. But Tommy Reese had been there first. A 25-year-old kid with a government job and a dying mother and a stack of paperwork that didn't add up. Who had been there first and had done what he could with what he had, alone. Before anyone else had a chance to stand beside him. Caleb thought, someone should have been there when he needed it. He thought, maybe that's the part that needs fixing. Not just in Red Hollow, maybe that's the thing worth building. He stood up. He picked up his wrench. He got back under the truck. He had until Thursday. He was going to finish what he promised. The Ford F-250 was ready by Wednesday afternoon, a full day ahead of schedule, because Caleb had worked through Tuesday with the focused intensity of a man who needed his hands occupied while his mind processed things too large to look at directly. The owner, a cattle rancher named Pete Holloway, who'd been bringing vehicles to Caleb for 12 years, picked it up at 4 o'clock and stood in the garage for a few minutes longer than necessary, which told Caleb that Pete had heard the news and was trying to find a way into the conversation. Greal, Pete finally said. Yep, Caleb said. Heard you were involved. And how it came out. Little bit, Caleb said. Pete looked at him with the particular expression of a rancher who had spent 60 years watching weather and animals and people, and had developed the ability to read all three without being deceived by surface conditions. You all right? I'm all right, Caleb said. And he meant it, which surprised him slightly. He was tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix, but underneath the tired was something solid. Something that had been tested and hadn't broken. Pete nodded. He paid in cash. The way he always had. And he shook Caleb's hand and he said, your dad raised you right. And then he left before Caleb had to figure out what to say to that. The news about Greal had moved through 3 counties in 36 hours the way wildfire moved, not choosing its path, just finding the dry places and taking them. By Wednesday morning, it was on the regional news. By Wednesday afternoon, the federal investigation had been confirmed publicly. By Wednesday evening, the names attached to the cooperation agreement had begun to surface, and with them, the shape of something much larger than Red Hollow had been prepared to understand. Greal had been operating under the protection of people 2 levels above him. People in county administration, a state contract officer. 2 individuals with enough distance from the operation that they'd felt entirely safe watching Red Hollow, and 3 surrounding counties get systematically drained while they collected at their portion and maintained their appearances. The thread Tommy Reese had found in the paperwork of a county assessor's office had not been the edge of Marcus Greel's operation. It had been the edge of something that Greel's operation fed into, like a tributary feeding a river. And now, because of a 25-year-old who'd had the courage to pull at it, and a 26-year-old who'd carried it forward, and a 38-year-old mechanic who'd been in the right place at the right moment and chosen to stay, the whole structure was exposed to light for the first time. Caleb learned most of this from Sandra Cho, who called him Wednesday morning with the particular energy of someone whose 8-month investigation had just cracked open into something much bigger and who was managing the professional excitement of that alongside the human. Complexity of what it meant for real people in real places. How are you holding up? Working, he said. Best I know how to process things. That's a good instinct. A pause. I want to keep you updated because you're going to see things in the news that might be confusing without context, and I don't want you caught off guard. She walked him through the expansion of the investigation, the new names, the cooperation agreement's implications, the fact that federal jurisdiction was now involved at a level that made this a significantly larger case than anyone had anticipated when Dylan Carter arrived injured at a roadside garage on Tuesday afternoon. Tommy's testimony becomes more important, Caleb said. Yes, is he ready for that? He's processing, Sandra said carefully. He's been in protective custody for several weeks. He's physically okay. The rest of it is something he's working through. A pause. He asked about you again. You told him I was fine? I told him you were under your truck by 8 the next morning. A beat. He laughed. First time we'd heard him laugh. Caleb held the phone and said nothing for a moment. He thought about a 26-year-old in federal protective custody somewhere, learning that the thing he'd risked everything to protect had done what he needed it to do. Learning that the chain he'd started was intact. Tell him Caleb started. What? Tell him the garage door's open, Caleb said. When this is over. Tell him Red Hollow has a garage with a bad coffee machine and a horse drawing on the wall and a standing invitation. Sandra was quiet for a moment. I'll tell him exactly that, she said. Sophie came home on Wednesday afternoon with the information that her friend Lily's dad had been on the news, which was how Caleb discovered that the story had reached the elementary school level of Red Hollow's information network. He sat with her at the kitchen table while she ate an after-school snack and watched him with the particular attention of a 7-year-old who understood that something had happened and was trying to read how much of it she was supposed to know. Were you on the news, she asked. A little, he said. Why? Because I helped someone who needed help. She considered this with the seriousness she applied to things that mattered. Was it dangerous? He looked at her at the dark eyes that looked like her mother's, and the stubborn set of her chin that looked like his, and the crayon horse drawing she'd made because the garage needed color, and he made the decision he'd been making her whole. Life, the decision to tell her the true version in the way a 7-year-old could carry it. A little, he said, but the right thing is sometimes a little dangerous. That's part of how you know it's the right thing. She thought about that. Were you scared? Yes, but you did it anyway. Yes. She ate her apple slices. Grandpa would have done it, she said. Caleb looked at his daughter. At the total certainty of her, the way she stated things that were true, as though their truth was self-evident, as though it required no qualification or debate. Yeah, he said he would have. So you had to, she said. Because you're like him. He didn't have anything to add to that. So he didn't try. Dylan called on Thursday, 11 o'clock in the morning, from what sounded like a parking lot. They discharged me, he said. How many doctors did you argue with? 2. But the second one I think agreed with me on principle and was just maintaining a professional position. That's a generous interpretation, Caleb said. I'm a generous person. A pause. I'm coming back to Red Hollow. Not today, I've got things here first. But this weekend. Raymond's coming too. We want to sit in your garage and drink your terrible coffee and not have any of it be a crisis. I can do that, Caleb said. I also, Dylan stopped. Then I want to bring someone. Okay, Tommy Reese. Dylan said. He's. Caleb set down the part he was holding. He's out of protective custody? He's. As of this morning. Formally. He'll have ongoing security protocols for a while, and he'll have to stay available for the investigation. But they released him to normal movement. He doesn't have anywhere to go. Right now his apartment lease ran out while he was confined. His mother's house was sold 8 months ago, and he's been in a federal facility. Dylan's voice was even. But underneath it was something careful. The way people spoke about things they were trying to present neutrally because the thing itself wasn't neutral at all. He's 26 years old and he has 2 garbage bags of personal belongings and nowhere to be. Bring him, Caleb said. You sure? I don't want to. Dylan. Caleb's voice was steady. Bring him. A pause. When Dylan spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. The specific quiet of someone receiving something they weren't sure they deserved to ask for. Okay, he said. Tell him the coffee's bad, Caleb said. I want him to have accurate expectations. Dylan made a sound that might have been a laugh, the kind that got surprised out of you. I'll tell him. The thing about Red Hollow in the 2 weeks that followed the arrests was that it didn't explode into the kind of dramatic public reckoning that outside observers might have expected. There was no town meeting, no public speech, no organized moment of collective acknowledgement. What there was instead was slower and more honest, and in the end more durable, the gradual, uncomfortable process of a community looking at itself in better light than it had been willing to before. People talked about Greal in the particular register that communities used for things they were ashamed of having tolerated. They talked about what they'd known, and when they'd known it, and what they wished they'd done. Some of those conversations were self-serving. Some of them were genuinely painful. Most of them were somewhere in between, which was where most honest things lived. Denny Park called Caleb from Flagstaff on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the arrest. Caleb was in the garage when his phone rang, and he saw the name and felt a jolt of something that wasn't quite surprise. He'd been half expecting this call without knowing he was expecting it. Heard what you did, Denny said. His voice was older than Caleb remembered. 60-something, retired, living with his son-in-law in a city that wasn't home. Heard you were in the middle of it. Little bit, Caleb said, because that was the answer that felt most true. The recording, Denny said. What Greal said on it about the store. About my store. I heard it. Caleb. Silence. The kind that had a long history in it. My son-in-law wants me to hire a lawyer, Denny said. Civil case. Damages. A pause. I don't know if I have the energy for it. You don't have to decide that right now, Caleb said. No, Denny agreed. Another pause. Caleb. Yeah, the night you decided to stay to not hand that man over. Denny's voice was careful. Like he was carrying something he didn't want to spill. Did you think about the store? About what happened to us? Caleb thought about it honestly. Not specifically, he said. But the store was in there somewhere. Everything Greal did was in there somewhere. You can't separate one piece of it from the rest. I should have done something, Denny said, when it happened. I should have made noise. You were protecting your family, Caleb said. So were you, Denny said. And you still did something. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one that felt honest and kind at the same time, and he refused to be dishonest and he refused to be unkind. So he stayed quiet and let the silence do what it needed to do. I'm going to call the lawyer, Denny said finally. My son-in-law's right. It needs to be on the record. He paused. I just wanted to tell someone that. Someone who'd understand why it took a while. I understand, Caleb said. I do. After the call, he stood in his garage for a few minutes without moving. He thought about the people who'd been carrying pieces of this for years. Denny Park, Doc Briggs, who'd trusted a scared young man enough to keep his secret. Tommy Reese, who'd kept that secret in his body through weeks of confinement. He thought about the weight of it, the distributed weight of a thing that no single person could have lifted, that had required each of them to carry their portion at the moment it was handed to them. He thought, that's how things actually change. Not one person lifting everything. Everyone lifting their piece when it reaches them. He went back to work. They came on Saturday. Raymond arrived first, alone. He's on the same road-dusted motorcycle. He's with better coffee from the diner. Across the street. 2 cups this time. Ease. And a third he said on the workbench without explanation. Ease. Dylan arrived 20 minutes later with his passenger, who was the piece of all of this that Caleb had been building toward without knowing he was building toward anything. Ease. Tommy Reese was not what Caleb had been picturing. He'd been constructing an image from the pieces of what he knew, 26 years old, brave, ease, frightened, ease. A kid who'd grown up in Red Hollow and come back for his dying mother and found something he couldn't unsee, and the image he'd been constructing had the blurred quality of a composite. Ease. The actual person who walked into his garage that Saturday morning was specific in a way composites never were. Ease. He was slight, Caleb's height but narrower, with the look of someone who'd lost weight recently and hadn't finished the process of accounting for it in how he held himself. Ease. Brown hair, unremarkable. Eyes that were doing what eyes did when they'd been in a controlled environment for weeks and were suddenly back in a world that had sounds and light, and the freedom of movement they were moving constantly. Ease. Not in a panicked way, but in the way of someone recalibrating. Ease. Taking inventory. Making sure that what they were seeing was what was actually there. Ease. He was wearing civilian clothes jeans, a flannel shirt that had the slightly off quality of things chosen without much thought, grabbed from the 2 garbage bags Dylan had mentioned. Ease. He was carrying a backpack over one shoulder, and he was looking at the garage with an expression Caleb recognized from his own mirror 2 weeks ago. Ease. The expression of someone who has been through something and is still working out what kind of person they are on the other side of it. Ease. You're Caleb, he said, not a question. Yeah, Caleb said. Ease. Tommy looked at him. The taking an inventory eyes settled briefly and directly on Caleb's face with the particular attention of someone who had been told about a person and was now comparing the account to the reality. Ease. Dylan said, your coffee was bad, he said. Dylan was being generous, Caleb said. Ease. It's genuinely terrible. Something shifted in Tommy Reese's face. Ease. Not quite a smile, not yet. Not all the way, but the beginning of one. The shape that a smile made before the rest of a person had given it permission. Ease. I'll take a cup, he said. Caleb got him one. Ease. They sat in the garage. Ease. All 4 of them, Caleb on his stool. Ease. Raymond in the folding chair Caleb had gotten to replace the lawn chair that had seen too much. Ease. Dylan on the workbench. Ease. And Tommy Reese in the lawn chair itself, which Caleb had demoted but not thrown out, because he wasn't a person who threw things out if they still worked. Ease. The conversation moved slowly at first, the way conversations moved when everyone in the room was carrying significant weight and wasn't sure yet how much of it was appropriate to set down. Ease. Raymond talked about the chapter. Ease. About the road. Ease. About things that had nothing to do with Greel or recordings or federal custody. Ease. And Caleb understood that this was intentional, that Raymond was giving Tommy the space of ordinary conversation. Ease. The gift of being talked to like a person rather than a case. Ease. Dylan talked about the hospital, about the doctor he'd argued with, about a nurse who'd been entirely unsympathetic to his position and whom he respected for it. Ease. He made it funny, which took skill. And Tommy Reese laughed at the parts that were funny with a laugh that was unpracticed and therefore entirely real. Ease. Caleb said, I heard you grew up here. Tommy looked at him. Ease. Yeah. Left when I was 18, came back when my mom got sick. A pause. Ease. 3 years back here. Thought I knew the place. Ease. Did you? I knew the surface, Tommy said. The version you see from inside it. Ease. I didn't know the machinery. He drank his coffee and didn't comment on how bad it was, which told Caleb something. Ease. The paperwork, when I first started seeing things that didn't add up, I thought I was making mistakes. Ease. I went back and checked my own math 3 times before I believed the numbers. Ease. What changed? Caleb asked. I found a transfer that had a notation attached to it, Tommy said. Ease. Just 3 words. An internal note that someone had made, probably not thinking anyone below a certain level would ever see it. Ease. The note said, Perm G directive. He stopped. Ease. I knew what MG stood for. I'd seen his name on enough documents. Ease. And suddenly the math made a different kind of sense. Ease. What did you do? Raymond asked. I sat with it for 3 days, Tommy said. Ease. I went to work and came home and sat with it. I didn't tell anyone. Ease. I didn't know who to tell. I didn't know if the people above me were part of it, or the people below me, or just I didn't know the shape of what I was looking at. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. Ease. On the third day, I started documenting. I made copies of everything I could access without triggering flags. Ease. I built a file. I kept it on a drive I never connected to the office network. He paused. Ease. It took me 6 months to build enough to be worth something. Ease. 6 months of going to work every day and acting like I didn't know anything. Ease. Caleb looked at him. 6 months of that. 6 months, Tommy confirmed. Ease. The hardest part wasn't being afraid. The hardest part was the ordinary days. Ease. Passing Marcus Greel in the hall at a county event and shaking his hand because not shaking his hand would have been a flag. Ease. Listening to people talk about what a good man he was. His jaw tightened. Ease. I thought about the parks. I'd gone to school with their youngest. Ease. The store had been there my whole life, and I knew, by month 3, what he'd done to it. Ease. And I had to shake his hand at a Chamber of Commerce dinner and say nice things about the weather. Ease. The garage was very quiet. You held it together, Caleb said. Barely, Tommy said honestly. Some days barely. Ease. But you held it, Dylan said. That's what matters. Ease. Tommy looked at Dylan. Something passed between them, the specific look of two people who had been in adjacent kinds of hard and recognized each other across the distance. Ease. When they found me, Tommy said. When the agents came. He stopped. Ease. His voice had changed, registers flatter, more careful, the register people used for things they were still processing. Ease. The first thing I thought was, did it work? Not am I okay, not what happens now. Ease. Just did it work? Did the file survive? Did someone get to it? Ease. It worked, Raymond said. His voice was simple and direct, the way he said everything. Ease. All of it. I know that now, Tommy said. But in that first moment, that was the only thing. Ease. He set his coffee cup down on the armrest of the lawn chair and looked at his hands. Ease. They weren't steady, Caleb noticed. They had a slight fine tremor that had nothing to do with caffeine and everything to do with what a human nervous system carried after what his had carried. Sandra Cho told me what you did, Tommy said to Caleb. Going to Briggs, getting the credentials, getting back here while someone was following you. He paused. Ease. She said you asked her to tell me I wasn't alone in it. Ease. I did, Caleb said. I need you to know. Tommy stopped. Ease. He started again. I hid that file with Doc Briggs because he was the only person in this town I was sure of. Ease. Not because I thought anyone was coming. I genuinely did not know if anyone was ever going to come. His voice was steady, but only barely. I thought probably nobody comes. Probably I disappear and the file sits there forever and nobody knows the access sequence because I'm the only one who knows all 3 pieces and He stopped. Ease. I thought probably it ends there. The garage held that. Ease. But I left it anyway, Tommy said. Because if there was any chance even small that someone came looking, I needed it to be findable by the right person asking the right question. He looked at Caleb directly. Ease. I never thought it'd be a mechanic from Red Hollow who'd never met me in his life. It's funny how things work out, Caleb said quietly. Yeah, Tommy said. Ease. Funny. Raymond cleared his throat, not aggressively, just the sound of a man creating a small transition. Ease. You need a place, said to Tommy, not a question. Ease. A statement presented as fact because it was one. Tommy looked at him. Ease. I'm figuring it out. How long to figure it out? Raymond asked. Ease. I don't know. I have some savings. Not a lot. The investigation is going to take months before trial. Ease. I need to be reachable. Need to stay in the region. He paused. Ease. I thought about going back to Flagstaff. I know a few people there. Ease. Flagstaff's 2 hours from here, Caleb said. Yeah. Ease. Caleb looked at him. He had thought about what he'd said to Dylan on the phone, that the garage door was open. Ease. He thought about the thing he'd been turning over since Agent Prentice's call 3 days ago about what the town needed and what someone who'd given as much as Tommy Reese had given deserved to find when he came out the other side. There's a room above my garage, Caleb said. Everyone looked at him. It's not much, he said. I use it for storage. But there's a bathroom up there and a window and electricity. I've been meaning to clean it out for 2 years. He looked at Tommy. If you need somewhere while you figure it out. Tommy stared at him. You don't know me. I know enough, Caleb said. Caleb, you hid a file in a pharmacology book with a doctor who didn't charge your dying mother for 6 months of care, Caleb said. Ease. You called that the last honest place you knew. You were 25 years old, and you built that file in 6 months of ordinary days that must have felt like anything but ordinary. And when it was done, you trusted the right people in the right order, and then you disappeared for 6 weeks. And the first thing you thought when they found you was whether the file survived. He paused. Ease. I know enough. Tommy's hands had stopped their tremor. Ease. They'd gone still, which was its own kind of response. Ease. It'd be temporary, Tommy said. His voice was careful. Ease. Testing the reality of the offer. Obviously, Caleb said. Ease. You're 26. You're not going to live above my garage forever. Ease. Dylan made a sound. It was definitely a laugh this time. Ease. Raymond looked at Caleb with the same expression he'd had at the side door. When Caleb had opened it, the expression of a man whose assessment was running and finding something he hadn't expected to find. Ease. I'd pay rent, Tommy said. We'd work something out, Caleb said. Ease. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. He looked around the garage at the tools, at the truck on the lift, at the crayon horse in the corner. Ease. He looked at it the same way Raymond and Dylan had looked at it, with the particular attention people gave to small things that told them something true about a place. She draw that? He asked. Sophie, about a year ago. Ease. Horse phase. How old? 7. Tommy nodded. Slowly, with the deliberateness of someone making a decision that was going to require something from them and was choosing to make it anyway. Ease. Okay, he said. Okay, Caleb said. Raymond drank his coffee. Ease. The storage room above the garage took 3 days to clear out. Ease. Caleb did most of it himself, with Sophie's enthusiastic help on the second afternoon, which meant the process was approximately 40% less efficient but significantly better in every other way. Ease. She carried things with the maximum effort of a 7-year-old and narrated her opinions about each object. This lamp was ugly. This box of old car manuals was boring. Ease. This folded camping chair was actually good, and she wanted to keep it. And by the end of the afternoon, the room was clear, and she had claimed the camping chair for the garage because the lawn chair was not comfortable. Ease. She met Tommy on the day he moved in, which was a Saturday morning with 3 inches of early season dust on it and a heat that wasn't quite summer, but was reminding everyone summer was coming. Ease. She shook his hand with the formal gravity of someone who had learned that meeting people was an important event that deserved ceremony, and then she asked him if he was the person who helped put the bad man in jail. Ease. Tommy looked at Caleb. Caleb gave him a small nod that meant, whatever you want to tell her is fine. He's me and some other people, Tommy said. It was a team thing. He's my dad helped, Sophie said. He really did, Tommy said. She considered him. Do you like horses? They're sure, Tommy said. Ease. She took him to the corner of the garage and showed him the crayon drawing with the pride of someone presenting work they were confident in. Ease. Tommy looked at it for a moment, at the enormous head and the misaligned legs and the enormous impractical smile. Ease. I like him, Tommy said. Her, Sophie said. Her, Tommy corrected. Ease. Sophie looked at him with the assessment of a 7-year-old who made quick and generally accurate judgments about people. You can stay here, she said. It was neither an invitation nor a permission. It was more like a fact she was announcing. Ease. My dad likes having people around. He just doesn't ask. Ease. Tommy glanced at Caleb. Caleb shrugged. She's not wrong. Ease. Tommy looked at the horse drawing one more time. Ease. Something in him that had been braced for a long time. Through months of ordinary days and 6 weeks of extraordinary confinement began. Ease. Very slowly. Ease to do something that was the opposite of bracing. Ease. Okay, he said. Ease. To Sophie. Ease. To Caleb. Ease. To the garage. Ease. To whatever came next. Ease. 3 weeks later, Raymond Maddox came back to Red Hollow alone. Ease. He didn't call ahead. Ease. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the same day of the week as the beginning of all of it, which was either coincidence or the universe's sense of narrative. And Raymond Maddox did not strike Caleb as someone who did things by accident. Ease. Caleb was under a car when he heard the motorcycle. Ease. He slid out. Raymond was standing in the garage with his helmet under his arm, and his expression was different from the other times. It had none of the operational quality that it carried when there was something to manage. Ease. It was simply the expression of a man who had decided he wanted to say something and had come to say it in person because some things required the weight of being physically present. Please, walk with me, Raymond said. They walked outside, into the afternoon, down the sides of the garage to the fence at the edge of the property where the chain Caleb had strung the night of the confrontation still hung between the two fence posts. Please. Caleb hadn't taken it down. He'd thought about it and left it, though he hadn't examined why too closely. Please. Raymond looked at the chain. You left it up. Haven't gotten around to it, Caleb said. Please. Raymond looked at him sideways with the look that said he knew better but wasn't going to push it. Please. He turned to face Route 17. The long, empty reach of it in both directions, the road that people pass through on their way to somewhere else. Please. I've been in this life since I was 19 years old, Raymond said. Please. 31 years in organizations that most people think they understand and don't. Please. We've done things I'm proud of and things I'm not. Please. We've protected people, and we've failed people, and we've had to make decisions that I wouldn't explain to someone who hadn't sat in the room where they had to be made. He paused. Please. I've met a lot of people in 31 years. I've learned to read them. Please. Takes me about 45 seconds now. Most people I know, within 45 seconds, what they'll do when the pressure gets real. Please. What did you think when you met me? Caleb asked. Please. I thought you were a man who didn't know what he was made of yet, Raymond said. Please. Not because you were weak, because you'd never needed to know. Please. Your life had been hard enough to build character, but not hard enough to test it. He looked at Caleb. Please. I was wrong, you knew. You'd known for a long time. Please. You just hadn't had occasion to show it. Caleb looked at Route 17. Please. At the road running in both directions toward things he'd never seen and things he'd seen 1,000 times. Please. I've been thinking about Tommy, Caleb said. About the 6 months he spent building that file. Please. About the specific kind of courage that takes not the dramatic kind, not the 8-second kind. Please. The long, ordinary, invisible kind. Getting up every day and going to work and doing the thing while knowing what you know and smiling at the right moments and filing the right forms and waiting. That's the hardest kind, Raymond said. I know, Caleb said. Please. I want to do something with that. I don't know exactly what. Please. But I've been thinking about people like Tommy, people who find something they can't unsee and don't have anyone to go to. Please. Who do the right thing alone because they don't know there's another way to do it. He paused. Please. I think there should be another way. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Please. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, Caleb said. Please. Something local first. Something that says if you know something and you don't know what to do with it, there's a place you can go. Please. A person you can call. He stopped. Doc Briggs would help. He's Travis, Waverly maybe. People who've been here long enough to be trusted. He's. And you, Raymond said. And me, Caleb said. If anyone would trust a mechanic with something they're afraid to say out loud. He's. They trusted you with a wounded man and a federal archive, Raymond said. He's. That was different. It's never different, Raymond said. He's. Trust is trust. People know who holds it and who doesn't. He turned to look at Caleb fully. Please. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it the same way Dylan said his thing, like I mean it, not like it's something people say. Please. Caleb looked at him. The chapter voted, Raymond said. Please. 2 nights ago, about you. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and took out something small and held it out to Caleb. Please. It was a patch. Please. Small, square. Please, the kind that went on a vest, but not a full vest patch. Please. Not a member's patch. Please. Something different. Something that had been made specifically, Caleb could tell, because it didn't match the standard designs he'd seen on the vests of Raymond's men. Please. He took it. He looked at it. It read, Friend of the Club. Please. That's not a title we give lightly, Raymond said. Please. It's not membership. We're not offering you that, and you wouldn't want it. Please. It's something different. It means if you ever need anything that we can provide, you ask. Please. If anyone connected to this club comes through your door, the way Dylan came through your door, they know you're safe. Please. They know you hold trust. He paused. And it means we consider ourselves connected to you, which is not nothing. Caleb held the patch in his hand. Please. He turned it over. It was well made, heavier than it looked, with clean stitching. Please. I didn't do it for this, he said. I know, Raymond said. That's exactly why we're doing it. Caleb looked at the patch for a long moment. Ease. He thought about his father. He thought about the choices that cost you something. Ease. He thought about the chain that had run from Tommy Rees' paperwork to Howard Briggs's pharmacology book to a Tuesday afternoon in a garage to here, to this moment, to a small piece of cloth that represented something he'd never sought and had somehow ended up earning. He put it in his pocket. Thank you, he said. Simply. Without performance. Don't thank me, Raymond said. You earned it. He put his helmet back on. And Caleb, yeah, the coffee. Get a better machine. It's a matter of self-respect at this point. Caleb looked at him. It's a matter of budget. I'll send you a coffee machine, Raymond said. Consider it a gift from the chapter. He got on his motorcycle and he rode back out onto Route 17. Into the afternoon. Toward wherever he was going. And Caleb watched him until the sound faded and then stood at the edge of his property with his hand in his pocket around a small square patch that weighed almost nothing and meant more than he had words for. Behind him, from the open bay door, he heard Sophie's voice. She'd come by after school, as she did most days, and apparently found Tommy in the storage room upstairs and was now delivering her opinions about how he'd arranged his belongings. Which was the particular love language of a 7-year-old who had decided someone was worth her attention. He listened to her voice and Tommy's patient responses, and he smiled, standing at his fence line on Route 17, holding something he'd earned without knowing he was earning it. The afternoon was ordinary, warm. Route 17 ran in both directions toward things he'd seen and things he hadn't. He went back inside. The coffee machine arrived on a Thursday, packed in a box with a card that said nothing except Raymond Maddox's initials and a phone number Caleb recognized. It was not a modest machine. It was the kind of machine that had settings and a grinder built in and a steam wand for things Caleb didn't know how to make. And when he set it on the back shelf of the garage next to the ancient drip machine that had been producing terrible coffee since the early 2000s, the contrast between them was so complete it was almost philosophical. Tommy came down from the room upstairs when he heard the box, looked at the machine, looked at the drip machine beside it, and looked at Caleb. Raymond, he said. Raymond, Caleb confirmed. Are you going to learn how to use it? I'm going to learn how to use it, Caleb said. He did not immediately learn how to use it. He read the manual on a Tuesday evening while Sophie sat across from him at the kitchen table doing math homework and occasionally asking him questions about fractions that he answered while keeping his place in the instructions. And by the end of the week, he could produce a cup of coffee that was recognizably better than what the old machine made. By the end of 2 weeks, he had a system. By the end of the month, word had gotten out in the particular way that word got out in Red Hollow. And Pete Holloway stopped by one morning, not to drop off a vehicle, but specifically to have a cup of coffee, which was something he announced with the self-consciousness of a man who understood he was doing something slightly absurd and didn't care. This is from a mechanic's garage, Pete said, holding the cup. It is, Caleb said. That's not right, Pete said. That's too good for a mechanic's garage. The machine was a gift, Caleb said. Pete drank his coffee and didn't leave for an hour, which was how Caleb's garage acquired its first non-automotive regular. Tommy was working by then. Not at the county assessor's office. That door had complicated associations that neither of them addressed directly, though the reason was understood by both. He'd taken on remote accounting work through a firm in Phoenix that didn't require him to be in an office, didn't require him to be in a specific city, and critically allowed him to work on a schedule built around federal appearances, of which there were several in the months following the arrests as Sandra Cho's investigation expanded steadily outward from Red Hollow toward the larger network Greel had been feeding. Tommy drove to Tucson twice in October and once in November to give depositions. He went alone the first time. The second time, Caleb drove him, which was a decision Caleb made without much deliberation and communicated by simply asking what time Tommy needed to be there. Tommy had looked at him with the expression he'd used That first Saturday morning in the garage, the expression of someone checking whether what they were seeing was what was actually there. And then he said, "Please." 7:30 said he'd have the truck ready at 6. Please. They talked on the drive in a way that people talked when they were in a car together. And the road was long, not the organized conversation of people with agendas, but the loose, ease, sideways conversation that came from having shared space and time and the specific low-key intimacy of going somewhere together. Ease. Tommy talked about his mother. Ease. About coming back to Red Hollow to take care of her, and what those final months had been hard in the specific way that terminal illness was hard. Ease. But also, ease in some ways he hadn't expected. Ease close in ways he was glad of. Ease. She'd known something was wrong with him during those months. Ease. Not the details, but the weight of it. She'd asked him once, near the end, if he was in trouble. He'd told her no. Did she believe you? Caleb asked. No, Tommy said. She was a mother. She knew. He was quiet for a moment. She told me that whatever it was, she trusted me to handle it right. She said she'd raised me to handle things right, and she trusted that. He paused again. She died 3 weeks later. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. I finished the file 3 months after that, Tommy said. I think part of what let me finish it was that. What? She said. He turned the thing over the way you turn something over when you were still figuring out its shape. She trusted me to handle it right. You did, Caleb said. I was scared every single day, Tommy said. I know, Caleb said. That's what I mean. Tommy looked at him sideways. You sound like Raymond. Raymond's a smart man, Caleb said. Tommy almost smiled. Don't tell him I said this, but yeah. The deposition in Tucson took 4 hours. Caleb waited in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the federal building, reading a truck mechanic's manual he'd brought because he wasn't someone who sat well without something in his hands. And when Tommy came out, he looked wrung out in the specific way that people looked after they'd had to recount difficult things in careful detail to rooms full of official attention. They drove back mostly quiet, and when they got to Red Hollow, Tommy said, "Thank you," in a way that had more in it than the words, and Caleb said, "Anytime," in a way that meant it. The trial date for Marcus Greal was set for the following spring. But the piece of news that hit Red Hollow hardest came in December. 3 months after the arrest. When the federal investigation announced the indictment of the 2 county officials and the state contract officer who had been above Greal in the network structure. Their names, which Caleb had known in the vague way that people knew local officials, as presences at public functions. Names on letterheads became suddenly specific and strange. The way familiar words became strange if you looked at them too long. One of the county officials had been on the committee that awarded the contract that had funded the community center addition with Greal's name on the new wing. When that piece of information surfaced publicly, the diner across from Caleb's garage was so full for 3 straight days that the owner had to call in 2 extra people to handle it. Red Hollow was a small town processing a large thing. And the way it processed it was the way it had always processed things, by talking. By sitting across tables from people it'd known for decades. By arguing and reassessing and slowly, imperfectly arriving at some kind of updated understanding of the place it lived in. Doc Briggs came to the garage the day the indictments were announced. He came in the morning, the way he did periodically. Now it had become a loose ritual. Something that had grown naturally from the fact that Caleb had appeared at his door on a significant night and had sat in his living room and treated him like a person rather than a resource. He came in, got a cup of coffee from the good machine, sat in the camping chair Sophie had claimed, and then tactically placed in the most hospitable corner of the garage. And he and Caleb talked about things that mattered in the particular way that 2 men talked about them, when neither of them were built for sentiment, but both of them were capable of it. The community center, Doc Briggs said. He was holding his coffee and looking at nothing in particular, the way he looked when he was working through something. I went to that ribbon cutting. I shook his hand. Most of Red Hollow shook his hand, Caleb said. I should have known. Howard, Caleb said. With the flat, direct honesty that the old doctor deserved. You kept a young man's secret for 4 months when you had no obligation to do so and no knowledge of what it was. You did the thing you could do when you were given the chance to do it. That's all any of us can do. Briggs looked at him. You sound like you've thought about this. I've thought about it constantly, Caleb said. The question of what we should have known versus what we actually knew. What we could have done versus what we were ever really in a position to do. He set his own cup down. I've decided the only useful direction is forward. What do we build from here? What does this town look like a year from now, 5 years from now? That's different from what it was when Greel was operating. What do you want it to look like? Briggs asked. Caleb had been thinking about this for months. Since Agent Prentice's call, since the drive back from Tucson with Tommy. Since Raymond stood at his fence line and told him that trust was trust, and people knew who held it. I want it to be a town where a 25-year-old kid who finds something in the paperwork doesn't have to spend 6 months alone with it, he said. I want there to be a door he can knock on. Someone who's known for being trustworthy, not officially, not with a title, just known. The way you know things about people in a place you've lived your whole life. He paused. I want that to be findable. I want someone like Tommy Reese to know it exists. Briggs was quiet for a moment. You're describing something that would require a certain kind of infrastructure. Nothing formal, Caleb said. Not a committee, not a board. Just a network of people who've decided to be available. Who'll listen, who know the difference between something they can handle and something that needs to go further, and who know the right places to send it if it does. Travis Waverly, Briggs said. I've talked to him. He's in. Sandra chose people. She's connected us with a contact at the federal level who does outreach for exactly this kind of thing. Community-level trust building around evidence collection. Caleb paused. There's a name for it in their language. I don't use their language. I call it knowing who to call. Briggs looked at him for a long moment. The look of a man who had been a doctor for 35 years and had developed the habit of assessing things with precision. You've been building this for a while. Since October, Caleb said. And you want me to be part of it. You're already part of it, Caleb said. You were part of it when Tommy Reese knocked on your door. I'm just asking you to keep doing what you were already doing with slightly more intention. Briggs held his coffee. The steam rose from it and he watched it. All right, he said, I'm in. He said it the way he said things, without drama, without qualification. The way a man said something when he'd already decided and was simply announcing the conclusion. Caleb nodded. Good, he said. Outside on Route 17, a truck passed going east. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. The call that Caleb hadn't known he was waiting for came on a Wednesday in January, 4 months after the night that had started everything. It was Tommy's phone that rang first, not Caleb's. Which was how he knew something significant was happening even before Tommy appeared at the top of the stairs that led down from the storage room and stood there with his phone in his hand and his face doing something complicated. That hadn't fully resolved into an expression yet. Sandra Cho, Tommy said. Caleb set down his wrench. They found the full structure, Tommy said. Top to bottom. The indictments this morning go 7 levels above Greel. He stopped. He was breathing carefully, the deliberate breathing of someone managing a physical response to something emotional. Sandra said. She said the recording, the 47 seconds. She said it's the piece that made the whole chain coherent. Without it, the transaction records were a pattern that lawyers could have argued around. With it, he stopped again. She said it was the pin that held everything together. Caleb looked at him. At this 26-year-old man at the top of his stairs who had built a file in 6 months of ordinary terrified days and hidden it in a pharmacology book and been confined for 6 weeks and come out the other side and was standing there trying to process the confirmation that it had all done exactly what he needed it to do. You okay? Caleb asked. Tommy sat down on the top step. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he stayed like that for a moment. Not crying, just being inside it, fully without trying to manage it into something presentable. Then he looked up. His eyes were clear. My mom would have. He started. Ease. He stopped. Started, and she would have wanted to know it worked. She knew, Caleb said. Tommy looked at him. She said she raised you to handle things. Right, Caleb said. Ease. She wasn't wrong, she knew. Tommy pressed his lips together. Ease. He nodded once, sharply. The way you nodded when you were accepting something as true, because it was true and you needed to let it land. Ease. He came downstairs. Caleb had the coffee machine going. Ease. They sat in the garage. Ease. The two of them. Ease. And drank good coffee that had come from a machine sent by a motorcycle club's chapter leader as a gift. Ease. And outside Route 17 ran in both directions, and the winter morning was cold and clear and completely ordinary, and none of it, not one piece of it, was what either of them would have predicted 4 months ago. Ease. What are you going to do? Caleb asked, after. When the testimony's done and the trial's done and you have a clean horizon. Ease. Tommy turned his cup in his hands. Ease. He'd been thinking about this. Ease. Caleb could tell it had the quality of a thought that had been visited often. Ease examined from multiple angles. Ease handled enough that the rough edges were worn smooth. Ease. I went to school for accounting, Tommy said. I'm good at finding things in numbers that don't belong there. Ease. I was good at it before I found Greel's paperwork. Ease. That's what made me able to find it. Ease. The same skill. He paused. Sandra's contact at the federal level, the outreach person you mentioned. Ease. She talked to me about a program. Training for people who want to work community-level fraud detection. Ease. Financial irregularities in local government. The kind of thing that gets missed because nobody's looking for it, and the people who stumble onto it don't know what to do next. He paused again. Ease. The kind of thing I stumbled onto. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Ease. You want to be the person Tommy Reese didn't have, he said. Ease. Tommy looked at him. Yeah, he said. I want to be the person Tommy Reese didn't have. Ease. The simplicity of it hit Caleb somewhere deep. The specific, clean logic of a person taking the hardest thing that had happened to them and turning it in the direction of making sure it happened to fewer people. Ease. That's a good thing to want to be, Caleb said. It might take a while to get there, Tommy said. Ease. The training. The certification. I'd still be doing the remote accounting work in the meantime. Ease. Still in the room above your garage longer than I said I would be. Ease. I told you the first day, Caleb said, the timeline is whatever it needs to be. Ease. You also told me it was temporary. Things can be temporary and take longer than expected, Caleb said. Ease. That's what temporary means. It's not permanent. The schedule's flexible. Ease. Tommy looked at him with the particular expression he'd been developing over 4 months of living above Caleb's garage, a look that had started as inventory taking and had settled into something warmer. Ease. Something that recognized a person and was glad they were there. Ease. Sophie told me last week that she thinks of me as an uncle, Tommy said. Ease. Caleb blinked. She said that? She said, you're kind of like my uncle, but you live upstairs, which is different from how uncles usually work. Tommy's mouth moved toward a full smile, which it reached and stayed at. Ease. I didn't know what to say. That's Sophie, Caleb said. Ease. She decides things and announces them. The deciding happens before the announcing. Ease. You don't get a vote. I didn't mind, Tommy said. Ease. The smile stayed. I didn't mind at all. Ease. Dylan came back to Red Hollow in February. He came the way he'd said he would, not in crisis, not injured, not with men following him down Route 17. Ease. He came on a cold Saturday morning with the particular ease of someone going somewhere he intended to be, and he walked into the garage and smelled the coffee and stopped. Ease. That's not the same coffee, he said. Raymond sent a machine, Caleb said. Ease. Of course he did. Dylan shook his head. He accepted a cup and drank it and sat on the workbench the way he had on that first night. Ease. Only everything about it was different. Ease. Because the first night had its particular gravity, and this morning had a different gravity, entirely lighter, warmer. Ease. The gravity of people who had been through something together and come out on the same side. Ease. Greel's lawyers tried to file a suppression motion, Dylan said. He's on the recording, I heard, Caleb said. Sandra called. Ease. It was denied in about 40 minutes, Dylan said. Ease. The judge read the chain of custody documentation and apparently was not entertained by the motion. He drank his coffee. It's going to trial in April. Sandra says 2 weeks, maybe 3. Ease. Open and shut is the phrase she used, which, coming from Sandra Cho, is the equivalent of anyone else saying absolutely guaranteed. Please, will you testify? Caleb asked. Yes, Tommy too. And you probably. I know, Caleb said. I've been told. Dylan looked at him. Please. You ready for that? Caleb considered it, standing in a courtroom. Please. Recounting the sequence of decisions that had led from a Tuesday afternoon with a wounded man to a chain of events that had exposed a structure running 7 levels above Marcus Greel. Being asked why he'd done what he'd done. In the official language of legal proceedings that required precision and clarity, and the kind of account that left no room for things like his father's voice in his memory or a crayon horse in the corner of his garage. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. They're going to ask you why you didn't just call the police immediately, Dylan said. When I came through your door. I know. What are you going to say? I'm going to say that a man came me hurt and I helped him, Caleb said. And that when other men came and told me to hand him over, I didn't believe they had the right to make that demand. And that everything I did after that was a consequence of those 2 decisions. He paused. That's the honest answer. I'm going to give the honest answer. Dylan looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said. That'll do. Tommy came down from upstairs then, appearing in the doorway with his hair not quite sorted and a cup from the good machine already in his hand, which meant he'd heard Dylan's motorcycle arrive and gotten up and started coffee before coming down. Dylan and Tommy shook hands with the ease of 2 people who'd talked by phone a dozen times over 4 months and were now putting a physical presence to the relationship they'd been building at a distance. How's the side? Tommy asked. Healed, Dylan said. He's barely a scar, barely, Tommy repeated. 3 inches, Dylan said. That's barely. Tommy looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, because some things didn't need words. The 3 of them sat in the garage that morning, Dylan on the workbench, Tommy in the camping chair, Caleb on his stool, and talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with recordings or federal investigations or the specific mechanics of how a network of municipal corruption got dismantled from the inside out. They talked about Dylan's chapter, about a cross-country ride Raymond was planning in the spring, about Tommy's federal training program, and what the first module covered, about the truck Caleb had in the bay that belonged to a woman on the north side of town who'd been putting off the repair for 2 years because she didn't trust mechanics and had finally come in because someone she trusted had told her Caleb was different. That was the word Dylan caught. Someone told her you were different, he said. He's Denny Park, Caleb said. He called from Flagstaff last month. He's moving back. His son-in-law is opening a hardware store on Clement Street. He paused. Different name, different building, but the same street. Dylan set his cup down. The same street as the old one. Denny said he wanted it on the same street, Caleb said. He said the street didn't do anything wrong, only the man who operated on it. The garage was quiet for a moment. He's right, Tommy said. Yeah, Dylan agreed. Caleb looked at his hands. Still steady. They'd been steady through all of it, and they were steady now. And he thought it would be a long time before he stopped being aware of that, before the steadiness stopped feeling like something notable and went back to feeling like just the way his hands were. Denny told me something else, Caleb said. He told me that when he decided to call the lawyer, to file the civil case, he said what made him do it was knowing that someone else had already done the harder thing. He said, if a mechanic in Red Hollow could stand in his garage with 4 men outside and not give an inch, then Denny Park could make one phone call to an attorney in Flagstaff. He paused. He said one person going first changes the math for everyone who comes after. The sentence settled in the garage with the weight of something that was simply true. That's what you did, Dylan said. Tommy went first, Caleb said. Tommy went first by about 8 months. I was just the person who happened to be in the garage when the next part of the chain arrived. Tommy shook his head. It's accurate, Caleb said. I'm not being modest. I'm being accurate. You started it. You built the file. You trusted the right people. I happened to be standing in the right place when the chain reached me, and I made a choice I think anyone should have made. He paused. The difference is I did make it. and that matters. But let's be accurate about where it started. Tommy was quiet. Then, Doc Briggs was before me. Caleb looked at him. He treated my mother for 6 months without billing us, Tommy said. That's why I trusted him. That's why, when I needed someone to trust, his was the first name I thought of. The chain goes back further than me. He paused. The chain goes back to a doctor who decided 35 years ago that some things mattered more than money. That's where the chain starts. None of them spoke for a moment. All right, Caleb said. Then it starts there. The trial in April lasted 11 days. Caleb testified on the 4th day. He wore the same jacket he wore to Sophie's school events. Because it was the only jacket he owned that was appropriate for a courtroom. And he answered every question put to him in the honest, precise, unadorned language that was the only language he knew how to use when he was being serious. The prosecutor asked him about the Tuesday afternoon. About the decisions he'd made and why. About the 8 seconds that the title of the story that had been circulating in various forms since January, he'd heard about it from Travis Waverly. Who'd heard about it from someone who'd heard about it from someone else, had somehow made famous. Can you tell the court about those 8 seconds? The prosecutor asked. The confrontation outside your garage on the night of October. It wasn't 8 seconds, Caleb said. A pause. I'm sorry? The confrontation. People keep calling it the 8-second fight. There wasn't a fight that lasted 8 seconds. Caleb looked at the prosecutor, then at the room. What happened in 8 seconds was that the men outside my door calculated that the math no longer worked in their favor and decided to leave. That's what 8 seconds was. It wasn't a fight. It was a decision. He paused. Every important thing that happened that night was a decision. Not a fight, a decision. The prosecutor looked at him. And the decision to keep Dylan Carter in your garage when asked to surrender him. A man came through my door hurt and asking for help, Caleb said. I gave him help. When other men came and told me to undo that, to hand over a hurt man who'd come to me for help, I said no. He looked at the jury, because that's where you looked when you wanted something to actually land. That's the entire decision. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't brave. It was just the thing I was raised to do, and the thing I'd decided a long time ago I would always do, no matter the cost. He paused. The cost that night was manageable. I got lucky. But the decision would have been the same regardless of the cost. The jury looked at him. He looked back at them. 11 of them were over 50. He noticed that and thought about it later. Thought about the specific weight of being looked at by 11 people who had lived long enough to know the difference between a person telling the truth and a person telling the version of the truth that reflected well on them. He was telling the truth. They knew it. He could see that they knew it. Marcus Greal was convicted on all counts on day 11. Sophie drew a new picture the week after the verdict. She presented it to Caleb on a Tuesday evening after dinner with the ceremony she used for things she considered important, holding it with both hands, making eye contact before presenting it, waiting for him to receive it with matching seriousness. It was a garage. His garage recognizably with the bay door open and a truck inside. And in front of the garage, drawn in the simplified but somehow accurate way that children drew things, were 4 people. A tall one with yellow hair, him. A small one beside the tall one, her. A medium one with brown hair to the side, Tommy, she told him when he asked. And a large one with a vest on the motorcycle out front. Is that Raymond? Caleb asked. Yes, Sophie said. He's going to be flattered. I know, she said, without a trace of doubt. He put it next to the horse. Denny Park's hardware store opened on Clement Street on the first Saturday of May. It was called Park's, same as the old one, because Denny said the name was his and no one had taken it from him, even when they'd taken everything else. He called Caleb the night before the opening, not with anything specific to say, but just to call. And they talked for 40 minutes about things that had everything and nothing to do with what had connected them. At the end of the call, Denny said, I want you to know something. Okay, Caleb said. When I lost the store when Greal did what he did, I thought that was it. That was the end of something I'd built for 30 years. And there was no way back from it. And the person responsible was never going to face any consequence, and the world was going to keep working the way it had always worked, which was in favor of people like him. He paused. I want you to know that I stopped believing that. Not because of what happened to Greel, because of what happened before that. Because a mechanic in Red Hollow had 4 men outside his garage and made a decision. Because a 25-year-old built a file for 6 months alone and trusted it to the right people. He stopped again. One person going first changes the math for everyone who comes after. You told me that. Tommy told me that, Caleb said. Then Tommy told you and you told me and now I'm telling you again, Denny said, because these are the things worth repeating. Caleb held the phone in his hand after the call ended and stood in his kitchen. In the house his daughter was asleep in and thought about the chain that ran back to a doctor who decided 35 years ago that some things mattered more than money, and through a 25-year-old with a government job and a dying mother, and through a wounded man on a Tuesday afternoon, and through himself a mechanic with tired blue eyes and steady hands who had been in the right place and made the right call. He thought about his father. He thought, yeah, I did it the way you raised me to. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. In the months that followed, Red Hollow became something different. Not dramatically, not all at once, not in a way that made headlines or invited outsiders to write about it as a story of a town transformed. The change was the kind that came from the inside, from people who'd been afraid of something that was no longer there, from businesses that had been paying and stopped paying, from a sense that the machinery underneath the surface of ordinary life was running cleaner than it had in 11 years. Travis Waverly said it best at a dinner he and Caleb had at the diner across the street in July, when the summer was fully present and Route 17 shimmered with heat that made everything look slightly uncertain. The town's not different because the bad guy's gone, Travis said. Towns always have bad guys. The next one's probably already here, operating at a level nobody's identified yet. He drank his coffee. The town's different because people know now that they can do something. That's what changed. Not the absence of the threat, the belief that the threat is addressable. He paused. That belief came from somewhere. It came from watching one person decide to address it. Several people, Caleb said. You know what I mean, Travis said. Caleb did. He just didn't wear it easily, which was a thing about him that hadn't changed and wasn't going to. Tommy received his first federal certification in September. He took Caleb and Sophie to dinner in Tucson to mark the occasion, which was the first time Caleb had left Red Hollow in 2 years, and the first time Sophie had been to Tucson, and she treated both of those facts with equal excitement and narrated her opinions about the city continuously from the moment they arrived, until she fell asleep on the drive back with her cheek against the window and her stuffed dog in her lap. Tommy was quiet on the drive home in the way people were quiet when they were full of something good. He looked at the road ahead and the night outside and the occasional light of a passing town. I got a call today, he said, before dinner, from a woman in Maricopa County. Junior accountant at a municipal contracting office. She found something in a procurement file that doesn't add up and she doesn't know who to call. He paused. Someone gave her my number. Sandra's outreach contact. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. What did you tell her? I told her to document everything she could access without triggering flags, Tommy said. I told her to keep it on a device that wasn't connected to the office network. I told her to call me again in 1 week and tell me how much she had. He paused. I told her she wasn't alone in it. Caleb drove. Sophie slept. The road went forward in the dark the way roads did. You're going to be good at this, Caleb said. I learned from people who were good at it first, Tommy said. The truck moved through the night. Behind them, Red Hollow. Ahead, Maricopa County and whatever was in that procurement file, and a junior accountant who now knew she wasn't alone. And further ahead, in directions and distances that couldn't be mapped yet, all the other people who would one day find themselves at the edge of something that needed someone to stand there with them. And who would reach for a phone, And who would find because of the chain that had started with a doctor and moved through a kid in a government job and a wounded man on a Tuesday and a mechanic who decided to stay, that there was someone to call. Please. That was the thing Caleb Whitmore never fully put into words for anyone, not even Raymond, not even Sophie when she was old enough to ask. Please. The bravest thing a person could do wasn't standing in a garage with four men outside. Please. The bravest thing was making sure that the next person who needed to stand somewhere didn't have to stand there alone. Please. He had done that. He was still doing it. And that in the end, when every other version of the story had been told and retold and circulated through 3 counties, and beyond that was the story that mattered. Please. Not the 8 seconds that had never been a fight. Please. Not the patch in his pocket from Raymond Maddox. Not the verdict on day 11, or the headline, or the recording that had done what Tommy Reese needed it to do. Please. The story that mattered was the chain. The chain that started with one person deciding to be honest, continued with another deciding to stay, and ran forward through every person who had been handed a link and chosen to hold it. Please. That chain didn't end. That was the whole point of it. It didn't end.